Oh no, it's
Okay, this is
so
like
we're totally okay just doing that.
okay, perfect. Okay.
Right. The thing is showing there. That's yeah. That's good.
Just kind of tuck that.
Brooks and then over here for a second.
I have time to want to see you in that time.
Do you want to go?
I see that.
My room is in like 115 if you want to go upstairs and read it.
What's the number?
This is
It's timing.
no.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
this. So I
You know
just
what I
want to make sure
Like, I
that
just think that
Yeah, no.
it's just like you have to get to this part of the AC.
That's what I think. So talk to Lee about that, but
That's what I want.
those are my thoughts.
All these parts here. This one.
So we
Okay, so which words can I skip?
what's the start time for this?
All these green
Okay.
impacts.
Yeah.
It's
Not that one.
6. Okay.
That's great.
Okay. XOXO. Good luck with fun.
Do you want me to skip?
And then just really go back to whatever page.
Oh, really? Okay. Oppa.
Thank you.
Oppa.
Opa! Matt Struth!
Matt Struth.
Matt Struth got some cards.
The Struth is out there.
Okay, Coach Struth?
Yeah, definitely. All day long. All day long.
You see the sanitation link you just sent me? Dirty. It's from today.
This is great
He
news,
says
Matt.
post dating.
Matt, I just want to give you a 10-minute warning, so this should be, Richard, you should be the one to talk to Struth, given what you and I just talked about.
Does this debate
Wrong
start
side.
at 6 or 6:15?
6:15.
Is it 6:15?
You will send it to me.
Oh, fully just lied to me. Okay.
That's what the tavern blast said.
We think 6:15.
That is what the tavern blast said.
That's
So-
great.
I love
That's great.
that.
Yeah, what am I leaving?
So like,
Wow.
kick it.
Taber's doing a lot of things today, though, and they're all true.
Fair.
Tavern
It's a
been
party.
What? Yeah.
We can all hang out with Richard.
Yeah. What? Now you are?
I thought you and I were just like totally on the same page about this, Lee, and I like was like, you do X, Richard does X.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, but I thought that was in the face of having Audible from this.
Oh no, that's regardless.
Okay, then yes. Then
Yeah,
okay.
you
yes,
you
then
get to
yes.
you get to
Yes, yes.
be
We're
the
same
wizard.
page.
Yeah.
Okay, always already same page. Boom.
Hashtag wizardry.
Wizard of what?
It is so obvious that you are not doing anything.
Absolutely not.
Just to be clear.
My role in this pre-round is just to bother Richard.
I don't think you've accomplished that at all.
Reasonable.
His defense, he's certainly bothering you.
That's definitely true. I'm very angry. Like always.
It's just your face. The bank is closed. It's not my banky.
It's not our banky.
Yo Ifbo? Yo Ifbo?
Yo, Ifobo.
Yo Ifbo.
We talked about that last night too. I got to retell the tale.
So happy to be debating Kansas.
Learn about the topic.
I don't know anything.
Melanie's like, that's what you think.
Yeah.
Well, I will not take a stance about
Yeah, lesbian separatism.
Because of the Pat rally,
Steven
y'all.
turned me to the dark side.
Who knows what he did?
Oh yeah, we learned Mercer's not a dude.
Excuse me, that's Pat Raleigh.
Yeah, you're now caught up. We've been pat rallying over here. Okay. I'm gonna leave special, thank you. So, bye y'all, have fun. XOXO.
Bye. Don't hit. We talked about this.
I just found this one.
Oh, yeah.
A mere spoon.
No, I don't believe you.
Because I think if that happened with the weights, but it's the second option, yes.
Like, do you want to put you full of people?
Yes, I will definitely take some. It's one of these policy debates. We want more than two.
Thank you very much.
Maximum in.
Let's hope that is plenty of sheets of paper or I'm in trouble.
Means we have NDT.
Not fair.
So like 20 condo counterplans? Yeah. And independently you're multi-plane. So in reality, it's like we're going to kick some planes and then make a whole counterplane to 2 in R. It's weird.
What's going on? Counterplan?
Methods aren't mutually exclusive.
Yeah. What's your role to tell about? Shit about your counterplans.
The role of the ballot is to increase policy debate voices.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's go.
I'll be out there in 1 second, dude. We still have like a little bit of time, right?
Yeah.
20 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I gotta get the site for this part for my paper.
So the conversation I just had with Leah is mine. Just project everyone watching the live stream.
Do you want to read this card burger?
Those aren't words.
This isn't my fault you can't use my computer. But I would need to be willing to slow down the mouse speed so that you could.
When you're done with that,
Can you put this in?
can I chat with you,
talking to me?
maybe? Yep.
Can you put this in?
Oh, not you, CDB.
Yep.
just like cards that say YouTube, that thing is impossible for other reasons.
Okay.
I've got some other stuff that will work, but
Okay. Yeah. We need to get answers to this.
So is that a live stream?
There's a live.
Okay.
Well, it's behind about 15 to 20 seconds. But yes,
So I'm about to walk in.
you are about to walk in.
This is going to be cool.
You can see into the past.
Yeah, this is really going to...
It might be longer than that apparently, but it's not that much longer.
This is pretty cool though. Who's all doing this? Is this for every round?
Cardo, he's got 3 debates up this debate.
Okay.
Can't remember which ones.
Is there more to that?
Who doesn't know? Well, they heard the whole conversation that I had with Ken.
Yep.
You good on that stuff?
Yeah, I'm just checking it out.
Alright.
Thank you. I like it. You did. Thank you.
Yeah, you walked in now.
What?
You walked in already.
Oh, I walked in. Oh,
Yeah, you're
up
still
there.
standing there.
Oh my
Struce
God.
over there.
This is.
He's good on that stuff.
This is how.
Hey, Stone.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be able to get my 1 hour sit down below YouTube.
Watch it. Like, double check my flow.
Yeah. Shit, drop that.
Yeah. That one. Yep. This Tracy card, these are he may read this losers. Okay. Yeah, Ben says the other one. Kennedy said that.
When you find those cards, you can download those if you're interested.
Yep.
So.
If you can like bob for 5 minutes and try and cut a card that hits uniqueness for this.
Yeah, so like Chinese soft card.
No, Chinese soft card. They say Chinese soft card. We try to have a Chinese soft card.
Okay. That's there.
A lot of people finishing this new app.
Oh, no, we're just beating all your arguments right now.
That's the truth. Send it to Breaker.
Hey, Jeshna, did you just get that? Okay.
Breaker, you got a card you.
So you did send it?
Yeah.
Just 3 seconds.
Never again.
Hey, DB. I'm sending these cards to you.
So you beat that card.
Damn it. Am I better?
No.
Hey, Breaker, I got 2 more cards to you. Like in your inbox.
It's pretty good.
My debaters are watching the live stream. They'll give you $5 to write down a random number. Just write down random digits. Just write down random digits that look like a phone number.
They get, if you get Lee's phone number, they would give you $5.
Yeah.
Lee, you're a popular kid. Look at you. Superstar.
You know what? I'm not gonna give you my fake phone number, but I will just always give you a voice number. So you don't. So they can't be like. I'll just be like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know. Yeah, literally. I don't know.
Skedaddle. Vámonos. Beat, beat.
I see where you're citing.
I was gonna slide down there, but you got a bunch of shit. And also, if I'm down here, I'm away from the camera. Or I feel like if I'm down there, I'm
You're
in.
actually in the spotlight of the camera.
Right here.
That's true.
Okay.
That's very true. There you go. Yeah. Sorry.
Did anyone have?
Just call out. We'll call out when we do the email thing.
What was the first name? Yep. Yep. Yeah. That's what happened to us last year. So we'll do it again.
What's up with you? Let's do this. Let's have a debate.
yours?
Yeah.
How's the Liberty doing?
Struggled around you, but
Struggle bus?
Yeah.
Both teams won one then?
Yeah.
Look, that's not that bad, man.
No, it's not
some
terrible.
crazy stuff going on.
There is.
And you're doing some of it.
That's true. We were definitely doing the crazy stuff.
I actually don't want yeah, no thank you.
Yeah, you might as well just throw me on. And Ryan 2WC.
In an orderly manner, does anyone else want on the speech job chain? Alright. We'll start with ZDouglas@gmail.com.
Worku, WORKU.
Dot wall.
Yeah.
RVL. What? SHEA. Yeah, got it. Second. KSTEN52.
Oh, that's what's taking. I just took my headphones off, realized it was the. Organa, OGATA.
OGATA.
Christian@gmail.com. Thank you. Can you put Matt Struth on that? Yeah, no big deal. He just asked.
Adrian.
We've got a Pafelski,
You know?
we've got a Repko, we've got a Ryan.
Yep.
We've got 4 debaters.
No.
We've got 6:15. We have round the 3rd. Debate well, judge wisely, have some fun.
Alright, so just send out the plans on paper and Bruiser can send it over for the process.
You want paper? No.
The
The
plan,
plan
the
is
apps
on
on
paper,
paper.
and then Bruiser will send it out before the process if you want electronically. Bruiser, you got that timer set for 8:30?
Can the kids from my lab this summer get on the email chain? I also think that like
Doesn't Gmail have like a max or
Can all my students get on it?
yeah. So, Burzer's mom is following this debate. She like
Well, my mom is
BCC'd,
following.
yeah.
She would probably like to be on.
Email
the
chain.
I got it.
You don't say that, you're gonna forget the plan.
Yeah, I know.
Anyone not good?
Advantage 1 is excessive use of force. Use preemption is moderate, leads to global conflicts for in 12. The American standing new president continues to confuse preemption with predator with the solid demise and blows that prevents attacks that will sharpen with China signal the world's aggression change, which could increase conflict and anti-factory and relentless for the policy that represents a challenge to the world instability, sets a precedent, result in proliferation of use of force and has devised other states like India, Pakistan, Russia, Georgia, Taiwan, and rational force. This already happened where Russia used intervention outside of who is it today that you may use this, and this causes multiple scenarios within the war, Indo-Pac, China, and Middle East, Steinberg, and to a final concern release the President of the U.S. limited action with respect and at the same time reducing leverage commits countries to use force, developing doctrine that lower the threshold for preventive use of force, examine regional crisis on the brink of open conflict. No country will embark on war aggression simply because the U.S. implies in the quasi legal justification they bad countries already think on the brink might use the doctrine to justify action they already wish to take. Potential examples of bound ranging from Ethiopian air to China, Taiwan, and the Middle East, India, Pakistan use pressure and early route of war that had the potential to escalate to the nuclear level of the situation without further exaggerated escalation use policy preemption made for hydroxy and added ammunition to justify strikes against Pakistan. Middle East war escalates causes sanctions. Sterling and 11 Middle East forces to double on WJ side quickly also use zero so many strikes. Such as zero result in nuclear wars against Arab populations. The Iranians are well prepared to launch the global ABW terrorism against the Middle East, but also homelands like neutralized killer. Resist kill a third of the world's result with almost Russia, China response to begin. Well, World War III highly likely the war will be anything but Armageddon, and so does India, Pakistan, Shafin, and nuclear conflict in the subcontinent would result in a catastrophic role in nuclear war in which would several jeopardy to that a nation would propose to its high level status for remain for as a decade, but also the world remain perpetually overcast so particles would severely damage the ozone smoke and thus lead to global cooling, and so does China Taiwan Strait time and 2K cross-strait war escalating to a full-scale war between the U.S. and China would embroil other countries and raise the possibility of nuclear war. East Asia will settle fire conflagration between us and their indoctrinating Europe to overshape powers to overturning their existing order. Russia may redefine Europe's landscape. We see the destruction of civilization, the prospect of a nuclear Armageddon over Taiwan cannot be ruled out for China to put sovereignty above everything else, and ICJ would rule against preventative self-defense norms, Bellamy, and a restriction since Article 51 expressly rules out preemptive self-defense. States have right to use force only after an armed attack has occurred. Article 51 will apply to the case of an armed attack. The attack could not be exercised to protect states against violation. Otherwise, in Nicaragua, the ICJ supported this interpretation of the view that the Court of International Laws enforced states do not have a right to collect firearms for response to which do not constitute an armed attack. These limits were loosened, and executive compliance is key in model zone. And in scope of executive power exerts a profound effect on the institution of ILA because of the nature of international legal system. The U.S. President to establish precedents that strongly influence what other states with dramatic consequences. Many states took note when Bush asserted the right to preventive wars. Other states asserted comparable war. These include North Korea, China, India, Iran, Israel, and Russia, and Taiwan. The techniques employed justified by the U.S. will emerge in the state because of the international laws accused sensitivity, assertions of power, the repetition of the practice and issue by executive shape law. The states include the use of catastrophic weapons engaged in preventive war, deterioration of human rights norms, attribute abuse power. What president may affect the practical legally future presidents and exercise the power of these broad executive powers, culminate in diplomatic options, remove regard the use of threat to national security, and its reverse causal use restraint based on international standards, solve for conflict. God, 6. The U.S. must abide by the rigorous use of the government preemptive strikes and doctrines of the lower threshold for preemptive action because the law accomplished or is nothing more would protect the world than the U.S. acting with legal boundaries. This is the essence of the UN and advantage choose ICJ credibility. Statistical analysis proves territorial disputes are likely to escalate. Valor 09. Territorial disputes are symptoms. One of the states will be asked for persistent exit. Territorial disputes are most likely cause of war. Limiting the territorial issues between two states to substantially minimize the conflict. States are at a greater risk of death when the territory is disputed by losing control of territorial boundaries. The leaders, political authorities undermine the leadership remains unable to control the foreign policy. The state of these factors linked to the international history. Territorial is the biological basis for desire to control and conquer. The territorial has been the primary cause of conflict. The fact has been the strong empirical test. If the state can control territorial disputes, peace can be achieved. The territory should be said the primary factor causing conflict and send cuckoo conflicts as a content. Tension between the neighbors flare with the slight provocation spreading a regional conflict between world war, anti-Japanese sentiment, China's still raw new dispute. Crowd pollution may reignite the anti-Japanese sentiment too. The night explosives the Roanoke have been also serious about the rain now taking place or Senkaku at the most. Countries claim as their own regard is important for the wider territorial claims, mining the prevailing views that Japanese military stage. The explosion of the new road between China and China is allowed to simmer. And war in the Pacific engulfing the world, the whole world may be in the offing, and so does South China Sea, Wesley, and 12 SES as the flash when conflict is supposed to break out. There's no established rules for managing maritime incidents. States, power states, separate overlapping prerogatives, and national means incidents are likely to escalate. There's no impact difference 20 and 11. The increase in nuclear arsenals have several effects. The most obvious is the increase in the unstable diads and they should not share characteristics that contain these instabilities that beneficial. The Cold War did not center on territory claimed to sovereign homeland for the China Russian borders long. The two sides are so work closely to each other. Post problematic is the inherent instability of rivalries among the players. The true are highly vulnerable to the sequence of shooting, quality, weapon size, arsenals, knowledge of the range of strategy. Stages will be pressured to choose risky or status of postures, and most real conflict states must consider deterring or retaliating against adversaries. These scenarios are worse than the bilateral rivalry in the Cold War and will catalyze more dangerous force postures. And ICJ credibility solves Asian territorial disputes and leads to Asian regionalism. Strachan. And 9. Southeast Asia is embroiled in territorial disputes. A resolution which would greatly increase regional integration. ICJ's potential to play a much greater role in resolving these disputes. That action should take into increase the court's credibility. China followed in a number of territorial disputes. Thailand and Cambodia has shown a sign of escalation. There are outstanding territorial disputes. A significant number of territorial disputes remain unsolved, and the plan solves reversing the precedent in U.S. versus Nicaragua. Key enhanced ICJ credibility to restrain the use of force. Gray and 13. From 1949 to 1986, no case of use of force of reach a decision on the merits that Nicaragua made the application to the court challenge the intervention by the U.S. ICJ rejected the USA's arguments. The court could offer recourse for states unable to seek redress in the Security Council. Even the U.S. judge voted that case admissible. In the later case brought against the U.S. based rejection on the court's right to hear the case on claims that it lacked jurisdiction. Nicaragua was generally recognized as a turning point for the court, and even if the ICJ is never used, restoring its credibility in states settled disputes outside of the court. Mitchell 6. Institutional scholars argue that institutions promote cooperation by increasing information, decreasing uncertainty, enhancing legal liability, raising reputational takes also the role that international organizations play in the conflict management process. The international organization may facilitate cooperation passively if few countries recognize jurisdiction of the ICJ may enhance the changes that they reach agreement out of the court's strong mechanism for institutions to deter countries, and the plan solves submitting U.S. use of force decisions to ICJ jurisdiction invigorates the credibility of the institution solved for global stability. Meyer. And 3. Isolation of American from global laws receive considerable attention. Refusal to accept the compulsory jurisdiction of the ICJ, the continued refusal of the U.S. subject its own actions or especially the use of force in the ICJ court. Ruling Nicaragua's case, the action of the president lowers the use of the level of international scofflaw. A strong international court is indispensable of international legal order prevention of the use of force in settle international disputes is essential. The Convention on improving the effectiveness of the UN endorsed compulsory jurisdiction to recommend the use consider accepting compulsory jurisdiction of the court. We must avoid a world in which any nation can divide whether its grounds attack its neighbor. The strong institutional international justice will make the U.S. a safer place, and specifically expanding compulsory jurisdiction creates a rules-based international order that overcomes tendencies of realpolitik. Strauss. And 8. The court is concerned by the boundaries of the law, that the court's ability to hear the case would be expanded the word. You have to be more law-based international system of caught in the contradiction between global order, the rights on a raw power and violence based on the rules of law. We perceive with the anti contradiction will diminish, and Obama is key versus Bush area antagonist at LAT and 9. Under Bush, the U.S. acted unilaterally exempt from the international laws. The key to reestablish international standing should be these issues. So Obama should reaffirm the U.S. commitment to the ICJ and disavow cynical U.S. exemptions of the Bush years are not the only period in which the U.S. has subordinated the rule of law and claimed laws more difficult than abrogating. Obama must false for delay, and the U.S. normally complies with ICJ ruling. Nicaragua is the ally. Motion 7. The U.S. has made a mistake in maintaining the ICJ dispute said no compliance with ICJ final judgment have been high, including the case in which the U.S. has been party implementation ICJ proceeded smoothly. Apart from Nicaragua, the U.S. has complied with the final ICJ judgments. All final ICJ judgments are addressed to it, and credible ICJ solves for resource wars. Tip 97. The World Court should play a greater role. The World Court should play a greater role. The court can provide time and agreement that is mutually beneficial. The court is an ideal form for boundary disputes. The court should play a greater role in increasing demand for resolution environmental disputes. It also create a chamber to deal with each environmental dispute. It causes extinction, abandonment, and security for American dreams and serving sustainable supply and cost whose wages and wars to get at stake are getting greater than ever. This is time to use the challenging China study the weapons at stake is more than also planet Earth with survival of all life on planet Earth with survival of all life on the resource wars means the point of no return. There's no second chance after the storm is split. There may be nothing left but resilient beetles in the wake of the virus real and was what nearly happened during the human missile crisis and icy solves for warming. Strauss. And 8. Critical scenarios suggest that global climate cannot make civilization unsustainable. International law is necessary for concerning and coordinating state action. Climate change is only more pressing problems with those who humiliation be furthered by through the ICJ. If the jurisdictional barriers could be from the court play and enhanced role in resolving disputes of large ecological import causes extinction. Bramberg and 99. The ozone hole expands driven by global warming. The Amazon becomes desert. The global time goes on. Mass excursion plants die and burn enormous fires. Earth becomes a second Mars. Red desolate with perhaps a few hardy microbes thriving. Birds, I don't have time to both of these. Is there another part you want me to read?
Yeah. Read the plan.
Okay, plan. The President of the United States should bind itself to compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice for decisions regarding the war powers authority of the President of the United States and to introduce armed forces in the hostilities. That's 30 seconds. Here's the plan. A strong ICJ creates peaceful avenue to conflict resolution, de-escalates wars globally. Castle and 3. A growing state confidence the ICJ role in peaceful resolution is important alternative to armed conflict that further addressing geographic spread cases such cases which have been filed in Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. Filed in cases involving armed conflicts and tried alternative an ICJ lawsuit may be a war by another means.
I will send the plan text down this. We'll take part.
Make sure the president would bind itself, what would that process look like?
You want cross-sex to start?
I'm taking
No,
the
that's just taking
You want to answer that
Yeah, the
question?
President puts himself under compulsory jurisdiction.
What does that mean to put himself under compulsory
The mandate of the plan is the executive would do it. There's multiple methods that can be done, like EXO, presidential directives, etc.
So you don't take a stance on what exactly
No.
it is? Okay. International Court of Justice. jurisdiction of the ICJ, does that mean that the ICJ gets to dictate?
If someone sues the U.S., we are obligated to follow the decision of the suit.
To follow the decision of the suit, is that all it does?
Well, the plan fiat and mandates that we are under compulsory jurisdiction. That itself is the restriction.
So, one of your evidence says the ICJ determines international territorial disputes off of laws. So does that mean that we are now held accountable to law of the sea treaty territorial disputes? I can read you a quote from your card.
Yeah, ICJ uses multiple forms, dominant forms of law, also like domestic laws, and it would just depend on the case-by-case decision. An example was that they used last one time, yes, against like China, but it just depends on the cases brought to the ICJ.
Wait, hold on.
During the war powers authority of the president, right?
Yeah, it's also
It's a justice for decisions regarding. So does that make it you think a judicial restriction?
The plan is a judicial restriction.
Well, it's also a statutory restriction.
Why so?
Because the effect of the plan is that the ICJ has the force of law in the U.S. for decisions regarding the introduction of armed forces into hostilities.
Hey, Lee, you got those prints that from the round tables? You have them? So if I save this right now, will you? So I'm gonna save this, and it's gonna update for you. Alright, I'm gonna stop.
Yeah.
Okay, 2:55. I don't know if people have this.
I'm setting up.
Alright, why doesn't the Bush Doctrine take out all of your F?
The Bush Doctrine,
Yeah.
the ICJ would rule against it and say use of preventative
No,
self-defense.
right. But we've had the Bush Doctrine.
Sure.
Over.
The Steinberg card says that the Bush Doctrine will
On
not just
which
randomly.
page?
The second card in the one you see. So the argument is not that people will actively look for a
Yeah, that card's from
justification.
2002.
Right, and because there are simmering conflicts,
Uh-huh.
they will use justifications by the
Simmering
U.S.
conflicts, like you have any proof for this? Like you've
Yeah,
got
we've
numerous
read-
cards from like 2013 that like territorial conflicts like increasing
You really
right now.
don't think there's conflicts in the Middle East or in
I'm
between
asking
any
you
attacks
why
in
this model
territory?
hasn't triggered those conflicts before.
Right, because conflict is not like yes, no happens tomorrow. Those are escalating now, and our evidence indicates
So-
there's a growing trend towards preventive self-defense.
How does the
evidence from
plan lead to
2013.
UN Nicaragua convention?
Sure. UN Nicaragua was a case in 1986 where we were going to try to reinstate the government that they had thrown down. And
We
used
backed out
armed
of the
forces.
ICCPR then.
We backed out of the ICJ because we realized we were going to lose the case. The plan reinstates compulsory jurisdiction. which
Compulsory?
means
You don't think we
back
have to pass legislation to do that?
out. No. we
Why?
don't.
Treaties
Because our
aren't
evidence says you
self-executing
don't have
because treaties are not
Dude,
self-executing. because of
ICJ
that.
isn't a treaty. It's an international treaty.
Right. But treaties are supposed to be the law of the land, and because we backed out of the ICCPR as
The
well as the
ICJ
ICJ,
is a
Well, I haven't asked
settler
a question.
of treaty questions, and B
Haven't
is an
asked
enforcement
a
mechanism.
question yet.
Yeah.
If we bind ourselves to the ICJ without any law of the land, treaties, Article 3, how would the U.S. be able to follow international law?
Well, so
we
the
have
distinction is
signed
that-
treaties in the status quo, Article 3 of Geneva, all of those things. ICJ says
And we
if
don't
someone
follow
were to argue our use of force was illegal under some random international
Wait,
law or whatever,
your
the
act
ICJ
is
would
we don't
settle that
follow
dispute.
any of that, therefore we should follow
No,
one of
our
it.
AF says that one, use of preventative self-defense is a norm that we're violating, which is bad, but two,
Okay.
independent
I have
of the use
another
of norms,
question
it's a
then.
question of ICJ
Territorial
credibility.
disputes happen because of preemptive doctrine,
What?
preemptive versus preventative doctrine. What's the distinction between the two?
It says anticipatory self-defense, so if
like
we
use
were to
in
be like,
bello
oh,
versus
we
use in
think
bello?
Russia is going to attack us now,
Right. And what
unless
is legal?
they
What is
attack
legal
us,
though?
it would be illegal.
Well, I want to know what you think is legal under
What
under
is
law
legal?
of armed conflict. What is
ICJ
legal?
would rule, and like all of it are in constitutional self-defense.
Under law of armed conflict for your act, what do you think should
Well,
be legal?
law of armed
What would
conflict is
ICJ
like
say is
massive,
legal?
right? It includes multiple things.
Right.
Like
No,
multiple
you're not like. Would the ICJ think that preventative self-defense in the context of use in bello or use ad bellum is legal? Which one would they think is legal?
It's entirely situational.
It's okay. So we don't even know the distinction between the two.
Well,
So-
self-defense and laws
so
of
why doesn't Jones
laws
take out
of
your
war
ass?
and self-defense are two entirely distinct bodies. Obviously, they don't overlap.
Well, ICJ uses Article 51.
Well, right, but it
to
depends on the
enforce their
context. So in the context of like target or the context of
okay.
use of
Well,
force
we're
is
not going
preventative.
anywhere. So how do you enforce human rights norms?
What?
Especially when you don't have any
ICJ credibility would increase.
What does that mean?
Right.
Well, like,
Sure.
that's a
So
very
right now,
vague
no
question.
one has confidence in the ICJ because the U.S. is not under its jurisdiction, which means any type of suits that happen in
So it's
leads
like
to
the U.S.
confidence
needs to
building
set the
measures.
lead so other countries will start following us on like
Yeah,
mitigating
it
climate
reinvigorates
change.
the ICJ
Public
because a bunch of
resources.
regional tribunals, such as like ASEAN, are trying to settle disputes which aren't sufficient because they think that the ICJ is useless because the U.S. won't participate.
We're not taking prep, right? see. Advantage 1, advantage 2. Do you know what standards are? If not, it's okay.
I think Struth took our stand and then did a great effect.
That's the same.
Email. He's on the email chain.
Yeah. Yeah. That would actually be pretty funny. Struth, we need our everyone gets it.
So 2 1 easy offers and the head of the ICJ.
May I have our also?
Yeah.
I'm shocked you give a 1AC off the stand.
Sorry, what's the case order?
Solvency, advantage 1, advantage 2.
You want to do a page for solvency?
Yes. That's reasonable. No, to ask me that question is probably not reasonable what I'm doing, but I'm just asserting it. This is just taking as long as possible to open, I apologize. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay. Is anyone not ready? All right. The plan's assumption of the nation state is the natural unit of politics, self-constituted and reinscribes methodological nationalism, extinction, and escalating violence become inevitable. Oaths and 10 from multilateralism, nuclear weapons, war on terror, world politics, witty transformation that radically alters the way we approach law, delegation, IOs, even multilateral hallmarks and sovereignty, the authority laws has been the hallmark of sovereignty reflected various extent sovereignty and national rules along of traditional conventional delegation of enforcement capability. States are often to surrender control over domestic policy, who often offer the soft law, particularly in issues of national security, until IR moves beyond the ontological categories of analysis suggested by nationalistic ideology. We will be ill-equipped to understand sovereignty in politics, taking the nation state as a natural point for the units as a political opposite of the constitutive assumption of IR theory, taking the existence of independent relations among actors in native governments and starting from marginalize the prior question. The long as IR avoids the question of social unity to remain complicit in methodological nationalism, such a perspective discourages even political action and risk legitimizing unjust political arrangement, given the goal of problems confronting humanity moving beyond nationalism. Sees the point that discourse representation reflects itself what is exercised through the acts of representing the sovereign, which legitimates the lawmaking authority of the state. Understanding sovereignty discourse practice implications for how we understand. IOs is focused on the discourse practice, hold the promise to rich our opportunities, what makes decision maker organize our enabling new possibilities, and our alternative as a framework is to investigate the methodology before policy recommendations, and rejecting methodological nationalism creates a new research agenda that is critical to understand the world and advance cosmopolitanism. Beck and Schneider and Six National Organization are the principle of political action. You can no longer serve as the orienting reference point for the science. Social science can only respond if they manage to overcome methodological naturalism. Methodological naturalism assumes the norm and claim is the social ontological given and links to new politics. Social science become a prisoner of national labor. The statistical indicators are always exclusively natural labor. Assumption of methodological naturalism, strong empirical point of view is impossible to bring up the process. Tackles the resume correction program. Period demand deconstruction or deconstruction can be a positive problem. Broader research makes it visible. New links next off is restrictions must be made in statute. The affirmative doesn't impose a statutory specific restriction. Broadly intended to discover the present war power authorities and tier something records all the decision of statutory ground under the court. Granted, its allocation of the congressional imposed restriction, although the court did not rely on the Constitution, did not oppose a specific restriction. Detention Boumediene was more about pursuing role for the courts than it was about prohibiting the executive authority. Refers to permission granted means restrictions must be on the statute. Taylor in 96, the term authority is law. The general power force the ability and authority to reference the permission granted by the principle of distinction between what the president may do. Voting issue 1 stabilizes topic authority in both narrow restriction mechanism, best chance of predictable off limits and complementary negative ground. They also fiat Obama, which obviously drags negative ground. Second, police for reasonability, just warrant precision, only checks on bidirectional commander-in-chief halves Horowitz. And third, to the president declares statutory authority commander-in-chief ambiguities are vague. It might actually expand the president's authority. Some views ambiguity statute concerning the implied delegation of authority to the executive. Next, all restrictions or prohibitions on action. The affirmatives or reporting requirement. Shadlow, Brown, 12. Ordinary definition restriction not include reporting and monitoring. Supervised blacks all responds to restriction limitation opposed from action in contrast. Supervised hard to have oversight and respect to the inspection definition of your different color. Agree to supervised condition not agree to vote out. Now vote negative. Only prohibitions on negative for the guarantee negative ground. Their interpretation less affirmative. No link or even link to best offense like deference. Also precision only on interpretation defines restriction on authority. That's the adequate preparation cross applies to voting issue. Next, all Obama pushing patent reform at the top of the docket. PC's key. Private. And 3, 2, 4. Obama will leave another given the positive right side of the option before purpose to the president strongly on the issue. We haven't really seen that before. With this, we really want to be the last. The Obama given the first president elevate patent reform. So meat and potatoes and zero trying to push patent reform. The House passed a major patent reform last year. The Senate is debating to save the planet. Towards Obama, Loomis, and several president limit foreign power with the perception matters most valuable is the resource ability to the overall offices with the ability to understand the adversaries and leaders. That's lawmakers calculate what a winning and negotiate accordingly lose the president's views of political capital as a Michigan capacity. Logically see and decrease benefit in public time themselves. This accelerates affection by key allies. The key to innovation, American economic security, good leader. 312 great ideas, power, dark, prosperity, and security, abuse of patent litigation, drug economy, syphilis, innovation, to the billion company, use to create new innovation, tech actors, hard work, the American innovation, litigation, trying to consume the innovation, access, occurs, the patent litigation. This bill will fuel the American innovation, Merlini, extinction, economic collapse, Merlini, and 11 use nuclear weapons, sugar, second career depression with consequence similar to the first, might become unbearable, since the retro approach will be sides of our return to unbridled nationalism. Next off, EU on board with aggressive posture. Now Obama's leadership is key in 321. Obama's Europe troop takes on new security focus. Ukraine reshape the message. Obama faces the challenge of convincing allies to chop and posture. The White House laid the framework for strong European action against energy and trade. So those who are clinging enough to bring the European along. Europe added a second round, but it's closer ties with the sanctions more difficult. That's why the United States is working very hard to convince most elected that they have the economic interest society. It's going to require an enormous amount of American leadership in Europe. Foreign policy leadership and the threats to the top of the White House agenda demand personal presidential attention. Now the plan got to that. Domestic losses on executive power take away Obama's ability to showcase strength and derail diplomatic focus. Epstein and 14 Obama watched his foreign policy in October. What's spending the next 5 over the new year. Now the 14th president to take control. Obama increased the turn to executive show that despite the congressional executive he still got power on the war front, the foreign arena offers an opportunity to significant action. Obama foreign engagement in the coming months into the market from this and the months from home dealing with the controversy you on the agenda. You want to cards you have agenda that's already balancing at the start of New Year's. The reset strong EU is key to prevent Russian aggression. Excellence in full scale war. Stacey and 323 of the United States and Europe is going to need to keep their game on the Putin's hand. Already Russia plays out tributaries over Ukraine's border. Putin is displaying enormous recent behavior altercation to this following the rapid full scale war is better to deter and Putin views the West as reckless and involved in classified robust response to economic sanction and necessary Western inaction likely to massive future Russian inaction and other countries likely to be deterred from territory takeover, especially China. Meager response to Crimea could lead to the taking the Chinese occupation of the islands both from Japan would be border changes supported by Putin's getting away from Crimea calls for either China does not be the United States credible, maybe able to occupy to speak to the United States and to rely on partners great extent in the past Western powers rapidly need to recalibrate the capabilities of holding them and counter or increase their effectiveness. How do we know when an actor becomes deterred and when their provocation? What is more provocation is an action. Putin experts believe that Putin is more likely to enter Ukraine if he thinks the West will be doing nothing. The West needs to be credible. Every massing Russian force the past 7 years has led to an incursion that's pretty credible. Now go to case. Go to solvency. I wanted to spend a lot more time recutting the affirmative cards, but I'll make sure to do that in the block. Awkward drones. This is a Raymond and 12 card. Another implication on sovereignty due to the NSS was again yet demonstrated by the killing of Osama bin Laden in Pakistan is impeded national security of Pakistan's foreign secretary Osama asserted that the violation of sovereignty commonalities of combating terrorism. Now the ICJ does this all by Asian disputes. It's the last resort. This is their straight and a 9-card rule. The ICJ critique, however, the ICJ now determined the maritime boundary of the Malaysian and Indian show around the 2 years. As a result, when the disputes not been decided, it is however important to note that despite the ruling out, the issue outstanding still issues. So man, once again, the tribunals arbiter only after partial resolution of the conflict. Several rounds of tribunal no take place with the disputes finally negotiated. The majority of territory disputes in East Asia have not been resolved this way, confirming that the majority of the nations of the region, the ICJ and other natural courts like ILOs remain something of last resort. Bilateral disputes resolution is more common. The conclusion says that the ICJ fails not because the United States tracking and 9 bilateral negotiations undoubtedly to prefer means of disputed settlement. The ICJ is assuming a greater role in understanding the outstanding territory cooperation South Asia. The courts might gain greater credibility in the eyes of Southeastern nations. Faith in the court's ability to settle disputes must extend beyond Singapore, Malaysia, and India. Moreover, the ICJ is meant to reform its nonpartisan status in order to convince countries that any rulings made by the ICJ are fair and adhere to. Now, their Obama key card says Gitmos and all calls LA time and 9. Obama must right wrongs. Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo Bay, and the waterborne society terrorists. Now, ICJ doesn't solve not credible village. And 10, the ICJ on the proclamation of codes of independence, cash out international law. The courts also legitimacy because of war argumentation. The ICJ decision contradicted the codes, decides codes of proclaiming independence, but the same thing goes about not of secession. And we're going to understand the case of contradiction. Also, Medillion and the ICJ locked in normally self-execute Medillion and the ICJ locked in non-self-execution. Political branches have to give a green light to treaty interpretation, solves executive plans. The plan creates a doctrine of judicial enforceability that collapses the PQD and SOP. It also functionally renders treaty self-executing. Turner and Tim Medillion appeared to judicial accountability. The executive power of the court rejected the president of use force to Texas to comply with the International Court of Justice. There's an ordering reconciliation of Jose Medillion original given. However, the court opted to give any revenue for Obama. The president to exert authority without regard to treaty interpretation. The court has recognized the distinction between self-execution and the required notion legal attention. However, the illegal rules were inconsistent. And the Medillion court clarified the issue by endorsing strict interpretation. This majority that a jury is not enforceable without further action. This is the presumption of self-and executed given the executive final say in the security obligation increasing the executive. Now that creates an unlimited legislative role for the courts and treaty enforcement calls extinction U and A. The scope of the arguments broadening the span of the political reach of the treaty power and international efforts to negotiate the area environment. Our majority economy will come to the top of the Congress powers. The globalization is the interpretation when they understand that a strong distinction between treaties and the power to legislate, march to legislate. One more off case. Text. The President of the United States should determine narrowly that it should allow for suits that are directly the International Court of Justice after necessary consultation with the House of Republicans and the Senate regarding the war powers authority of the President of the United States to introduce armed forces into hostilities and make a public announcement. Yep. Okay. Go back to KISS. PMC use private military. Okay, I'm just going to read Impact D. Go to preemption advantage. PMC's Jack Lowak, Riddlin in 2008 period, PMF personal future combination negotiation, PMF under the image of the United States Canada working in accordance with all the service justification other than violated. Now, there's no impact to USAID Bello and USAID Bello globally. Conflation is inevitable, Sloan, and 9 countless states in charge of change. USAID Bello and USAID Bello documents, USAID Bello and Magellan seem to refer to this as dualistic axiom. The axiom is logically unquestionable, miss of practice, perceived legitimacy in NATO, Bello going to include international approach till the NATO and Bello pushes launch of the global war and terror invoke USAID Bello, marked at USAID Bello, no in Middle East war, Maloney and 7 the Lunas leaders are interested in self-reservation, most armies and regime protection, rather protecting power and the political capability, sending troops marked at troop new impact to Indo-Pac war ganglia. The outcomes of 1980 new crisis showed nuclear deterrence is both and saturated by cards were decaying. You were saying train they adhere to the general guidelines, left them more vulnerable. The military to train that avoided provoking Pakistan fears of a water attack, market attack. Now go to the China advantage. China's using soft power effectively now, but it trades off in the United States. Holga in 12-6, China does not need to try because the present work of serving vigilant war power. The Western system has long been losing competitive solution. Willingness of China's leader James from David, U.S. insistent hegemonic order complementing the fair year. Given the present political problem, China's possibility to acquire soft power and exert its positive influence are real now. Marks it real, and Chinese soft power restrains aggression. The alternative causes China to be lash out Huang. And 13, China's soft power contribute to peace and stability. They are proud of China being socialized, less China power that complies with the global north. China has a new face, new leadership. Front China with the opportunity to reset its soft power in the direction of the foreign policy. Market foreign policy. Now there is no impact to multilateralism. They're incapable of solving bad. And 10, national institution and cover the global risk. There's an international organization effectively regulating global capital risk, where society internally integrating opposing national mechanisms, bilateral, multilateral agreement, national corporation, civil society. There is an increasing unrest, marked unrest, no resource wars, here, trios, and 12 resource wars, unlikely to make go China and India, military class, no rest on two fallacies of our and intel resource, non-conventional hydrocarbon, become attractive, marked and attractive, no warming, impact, variance, several climate change, not threatening survival, human speed, biodiversity, not including other reasons, catch up, climate change, not certain, changes will have the change, to unfold, given time to adjust, so climate change is likely to be ruinous.
We get all the cards.
Yeah.
So the additional counterpoint.
Yeah, can I get the mark?
Yeah.
Do you need those for the copy?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
I'm looking. Yes.
Okay, cool, yeah.
You good, Lee?
It's saying, yeah.
Yeah, deal. The counterplan says that the President of the United States should determine narrowly that it should, quote, allow for suits that are directly the ICJ. What does that mean?
It means that the president wouldn't be under compulsory jurisdiction, but allow for suits to come in and determine if those suits are.
So not compulsory jurisdiction. That's the status quo. People can still sue us in the ICJ, but
Yes.
we just don't have any type of
And
jurisdiction
we
to
don't go
follow.
into the ICJ because we backed out and stopped funding
Right,
the ICJ.
because we're also
the counterplan would mean we
non-compulsory
fund,
jurisdiction.
Right. Well, different. The counterplan means we would fund the ICJ and
The
listen to
counterplan
if.
funds the ICJ.
Right,
Where do you think
because
it says that?
we would narrowly decide to listen to suits. To decide
What
to
would
listen to
narrowly
suits would
decide
mean that
over
we would
what?
have to necessarily join the ICJ again. We
We-
left
does the
ICJ.
counterplan mandate that we join the ICJ?
Yes, narrowly though.
What is narrowly?
If they
We
s-
are part of the ICJ
so-
now.
Oh, we backed out.
Okay,
That's a different question.
necessary, that's fine. What does necessary consultation with the House of Republicans and Senate mean? Is it a binding, genuine prior consultation?
So if the ICJ decision were to rule in favor for the president, that means that he can consult with Congress, House and Senate to
Wait,
determine
what?
if the suit was in favor of the U.S., whether we would listen to it or not.
So, after the suit has happened,
Mhm.
Obama goes to Congress and consults him about whether or not we listen to that suit?
You're right. So once
Do we
the
subject ourselves
right,
to the
post-
ICJ before that?
Post-Nicaraguan crisis, if Nicaragua were to sue the U.S. in the ICJ, the U.S. would ask, the president would ask Congress whether to lison or not, and if they say yes, he would listen.
And if they say no, they say no.
Yes.
Okay. T restrict. Why isn't the plan a restriction on statute?
It doesn't isolate the statute.
So we don't clarify which statute it is the
Yeah.
violation?
I said, yeah, the
All
act
right.
doesn't
What?
impose a specific
It's true that the
restriction.
plan text says restrict the president's war powers authority, and war powers authority.
Dude,
equals
thanks
stem
for
from
giving us the
statute. What's
topic
distinction?
resolution. We asked for a bit more.
What's the difference between the plan and then the topical version of the app?
One that states the specific statute and not repeat the resolution.
What is the specific statute?
I don't know.
That's
I don't know.
resolution
This seems like
argument?
the problem. This
so
is our
we
grounds
learned that
argument.
the
We don't
plan
know. So
restricts
yeah,
a
thank you.
Authority. Or so can authority not come from a court? Can a court topically restrict under your interpretation?
Yes.
Okay. The T prohibit. Let's actually talk about the EU. A link, the Epstein evidence
Yes.
says Obama watched his foreign policy agenda get knocked off by courts by domestic fights. Obama increasingly turns to the executive action to show that despite congressional odds acts against him, he's still got power. Why isn't the plan an example of that executive power?
We'd argue that him being forced to constrain compulsory to the ICJ is the weak signal.
Right, your internal
internationally.
link is the weak signal between domestic battles at home and
That's
Obama
not true.
and
That's not true.
Right, so why
it says
does
that domestic perceptions of home front are critical to
Right,
larger
because
perceptions
if,
of
if
Obama. But the
Putin,
losers
if Putin
lose link
thinks that
is
there's
just
a
pretty
huge fight
strong
in
here.
Congress about future authorization.
I don't think
of
it
force,
it
that will
doesn't say
happen.
there's a huge fight in Congress. That's not the link at all.
What link evidence? So Epstein is not the link then?
No, it is, but it's not about a congressional debate.
That's what I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Well,
But I have arguments against it, obviously. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
What are the net benefits to the counterplan?
Which one?
There's only one counterplan. It's all. Hold on. It's the treaties, self-executing treaties, and EU as well as politics. Yep.
understand correctly, he will announce the counter plan as your question, and then is the question, will he continue to announce it?
Yeah, no, that's.
He will announce that he did that, and then follow through.
Okay, just sent out. The order is solvency, preemption, ICJ, the first T argument, the second T argument, the counterplan, the K. Ukraine dissad, and politics dissad.
Can you that order one?
Yeah. Solvency, preemption, ICJ.
That's advantage one, advantage two. Good.
Yeah. The first T, the second T, the counterplan, the K, Ukraine, politics. Okay. Is anyone not good? Jones on the internal and state justified preemptive action based on U.S. intervention in offensive military doctrine targeting terrorists is irrelevant to any of our impacts scenarios, even if our internal link evidence talks about it now. Yes, we solve agents. Yes, we solve agent strategy and sentence use as a conflict escalation, even if it's a last resort. This is also just uniqueness for the evidence. This evidence says that it's failing now because of lack of ICJ credibility. The plan reverses that the Gimel argument that's not implicated. That does not implicate any of our advantages, even if that article advocates that the Kosovo argument. Their evidence comes from a Serbian legal advisor. Obviously, he doesn't like it because Kosovo was breaking from Serbia. The decision didn't collapse credibility of VOA. To the ICJ rule Kosovo's declaration of independence that finally officially held the decision visiting Prime Minister. The best possible answer to the U.S. express word for the ICJ. This is also that's also uniqueness for the advantage that was explained about now. The last two arguments group in this. There is no link to this. This and it's about the court's ruling, which is obviously not the plan. The plan does not make treaties or any international bodies self-executed on the United States. There's also not a terminal impact. It's terminal impact to you. We get new answers. We get new answers if they make new arguments. The preemption advantage. PMC's the plans also because they're part of the armed forces. Their conflation evidence that does not apply. It's about preemption, not conflation. Conflation of the norm. Yes, Middle East conflicts. The states have to use it or lose it mentality, which means that launch on war is likely. Yes, Indo-Pac war tensions or high now miscalculations likely preemptive doctrines, escalated difference to terminal impact to China. Taiwan draws in the United States goes global. No new answers in the black now. The SCJ advantage the China soft power to decide group of the plan does not boost U.S. credibility. There's no link to a U.S. credit flow. Now K314 is the as it was like the real source for foreign policy under the Americans definitely told me to go back to the world to defend the perception of the U.S. is weaknesses, provocative Chinese soft power, inevitable tons of factors that are unrelated to planarchy. Of course, you have to learn to Chinese culture, Chinese soft power, cultural action, right? Opportunities actually exercise its empathy, impact, spectrum, soft power, it includes cultural language, but diplomacy, escalation, festivals, and events. There are also sense of alternative causes like natural disasters, human rights. Yes, there is an impact. ICJ don't just reject their generic impact. Generic impact. This posture says that it provides a dispute forum, which means the conflicts never escalate. Yes, there are resources where states have incentives to get drawn. These states have incentives to draw in because they want to protect the resources. Only the plan is able to solve. Yes, impact of warming collapses. Supply collapses biodiversity, which independently leads to extinction. Now, the first topic, how do we meet all these words are in the plan text, which means it's just a question of solvency. We meet the war powers resolution authorizes the president to interrupt our introduce armed forces into hostility plan restricts that interpretation. The F has to be as topical as the resolution authorities, but the president may do the act changes his permission to tailor 96 hour refers to the agents who have to reduce change authority refers to prior given the permission granted to the agent. The distinctions between what the agent can do, what the agency may do for precision. They have no evidence that is exclusive or has been intended to find the broadly evidence is just using the term casualties that just casually their arguments are arbitrary. There's no resolutional basis. It's just functionally dissolved into effect. Yes, we can use the president. They have no evidence to the contrary. Two pieces of defense versus structural limits on acts. Ensure that there's always negative ground because every act has to have an angle against the flexes and politics, have a solvency advocate, etc. Second is negative ground. They could read their answers to self-restraint. Every day said there's how links reasonability specific between interpretation creates a race to the bottom over incentivized going for T now. The second T we beat the plan prohibits the rights from exercising outside of the compulsory jurisdiction of the ICJ. Restriction means a limit includes conditions of action. CAA we assume opportunity restrictions and limitation under the commonly accepted definition of privilege for restricted with requirement. It means within RC 13 and again the conclusion with them for act flexibility. They're the only acts that all the other acts would lose to the exception because there's always an example where it wouldn't need to the defense and reasonable arguments will apply now. The counterplan permutation due to the counterplan that counterplan must compute off the explicit mandates of the plan, not a likely outcome is the most objectively arbitrary way to view counterplan competition. Doesn't solve any of the act. Nicaraguan compulsory jurisdiction are key to solve the act because the ICJ is not credible now. Only ruling against the United States is effective. That's the one you see my reference. The counterplan is functionally the status quo because the U.S. can go to the ICJ for every case in the status quo, but that's not credible. Because the other countries don't receive that as credible because we just back out of our commitments. Like in Nicaragua, Congress would also say no to the counterplan because they wanted the president to retain power. It also links to the Ukraine just because Obama announced that he was still look weak now.
Perm submit us under compulsory jurisdiction and consult over whether or not we follow the ruling.
Perm what?
Perm submit U.S.
Submit U.S. compulsory jurisdiction
and consult about whether or not we follow.
And consult about whether or not we follow the ruling. Okay. Roll the mouse to determine whether or not the actualization of the affirmative good idea versus the actualization of the commanded method as applied to a broader institutional system. Any roll the mouse doesn't be with the affirmative advocacy is arbitrary and self-serving. Next way moves the ethical substitution and back to the one he seated and reading self-restricted capabilities first in the discussion of more powers and topic education governments obey institutional logics that exist. Individuals can train decision making. That's true regardless of the debate-wise situation. Concentrated in any point involvement in individual and draw relations class number jurisdiction. Individuals find the context of human social structure, position, practice, social field. The mind situation occupants have society exists and individual understands in particular one time give the behaviors institutionalized there must be set relations that come there. Explanation deputy to the conscience of individual interpretation of both the nation state is the unit of politics, but the one you see doesn't preclude possibility of focus on external actors. We have defense of the way we view international relations. It's the most peaceful system Russia in relevant related to the game here. Just as all circumstances international regimes senses of north they also the production of those multilateral positions competition over relative gains advance of scope in this discussion setting changes the states and over outcomes and judging responsibility to feedback of international by themselves in commons, local governments against demonstrators, trade to against centers or other states who cooperate reduce custody order. Now the Ukraine says there's not a leak. The absent evidence is about fights between Obama and Congress, which obviously is not the African new answers to the block when they read new leaks. Self-defense is no longer part of U.S. doctrine. It's clearly articulating that like the plan is the only way to solve Russia-Ukraine conflict. Carol for Team Russian team seven resistance by Robert Hudson's rights of Columbia. Solving military force time to this against technology limited to American military activities. Central is real, especially in the U.S. Actual moment for no more charges to dealing with American martial arts and martial doctrine, the dangerous situation, the imperial rights, the wisdom of the basic force of Obama has said this is a time of discovery of new American rights, actually fully articulated begin by ideology. The U.S. no longer international order is fully committed to international wars, self-defense, the north and that uses Russia and violent possible futures that now when the war does not work, no chance of war, two wars, no necessarily we were 350 chance of the U.S. and Russian military U.S. and Russia almost certainly must come to the close war would never happen if the Cold War possibility makes it run. You want to likely if you down the asses the U.S. Russian cases are almost towards cooperative U.S. and Russia already fought a stream of parts wars from Vietnam to Afghanistan while looks weak on Ukraine and Uganda war takes on Friday with Obama to after the Constitution Russia defeat just 70 Obama's decision 90 there's not 20 not situations waiting for taking military action over to Obama's responsible with credibility for Supreme Court credibility problem politics. Oh shit, I did not insert the 2AC. I'll flash you these cards after. No impact to economic decline, judge no 14, judge no 14, the significant outcome restricted dresses dog that has marked the effect of the recession, the conflict, the annals, legally enforced aggregate that suggests otherwise the institute for economic decision, conclusions of the visions of this in 2012, the same as 2009 interstate bonds, as have military expeditions such from the recession that's constitutional trade to conflict pattern is one of relative stability. Ukraine films and takes out the dissenting. British mighty bombs relies on the holy war, just facing a serious challenge with the Ukraine. President thinks this is definitely the battle investigations and auction and completed with the president's definitely the message how recent. Introducing research and surprise next year, examples of the so it's not enough. Or record different links to be covered by a lot of folks aren't listening. Western influence in Washington reading, you won't pass some big opposition batsman. 3, members on Senate, many research and war changes the resolution bills and moves ball can be I don't think the old process changes since we not ever give this modern system reform bills design patents colossus 9 forward transparency quality little addresses sign patents or change easy working like lab hundreds of millions of damages differences Congress has addressed patent reform legislation for look after local patents versus no effective patent controls repeated 3 catches not responsible to makers and directions are problem with the patents there are no average people who say there's like anecdotes lawsuits of officers software patents or you can have some things may be misplaced. Executive action does not link to politics. Harvard Law Review 12. Political straits are legal strategies, legal trade strategies, political consideration made. Legal representatives engage self-finding for president, self-finding seems like public review his or her right as legitimate. It avoids all their partisanship links going. Even Washington highly partisan for to change or to competition. There's little measures for presidents over each party. As they start to win the White House, there's little political incentive to say enough is enough. Let me flash you these cards really quick.
Reasons to reject the team.
Conditionality.
Alright, thank you. Do you want to take me through the steps how the affirmative increases ICJ credibility to where it solves negotiation and territorial disputes?
Yeah, sure. So right now the ICJ has no credibility because it withdrew compulsory jurisdiction of the court in the Nicaragua versus U.S. case in 1986.
You mean to say the United States has no credibility because it withdrew, or the ICJ?
The ICJ has no credibility because the United States withdrew
because the
compulsory
United
jurisdiction.
States withdrew.
Right. So
Yep.
other states were like the U.S. does not perceive this to have any binding force, so there's no reason other states should perceive that as credible. The plan reverses that.
Okay. I'm curious. Your evidence says that there are negotiations happening in the status quo between nations like Malaysia. I read evidence that repeated that. How does the United States, just joining the ICJ, changes the mechanisms and legal interpretations they use to rule on things?
Right. So you are correct that the ICJ still has the same legal mechanisms available to it. The difference post-plan is the perception and the credibility that other states give to the rulings of the ICJ. So post-plan, other countries have a much larger incentive to comply by ICJ rulings.
Because the United States complies?
Yeah, because it restores
on the
the
cave,
international.
where do institutions come from?
What?
Where do institutions come from?
They are made up of people.
Thank you. That was an amazing question that contradicted the first card. Second
disagree.
question.
The first card
Carol,
makes that concession and says changing multiple people's understanding does not change larger institutions.
Well, that's not what you said, but sure. The Carroll evidence that you read on the disad says, quote, preventative war, that is, no longer forms part of American martial doctrine. The lessons of the Iraq and Afghanistan misadventures is that does not succeed. This seems to be a card from 2014 that says that preventative war doctrine is not Obama's.
Yeah, you're right. Obama no longer does it. So all of the modeling from other countries is based off of the Bush doctrine. So the AF, there's no dissent doing the AF in the sense that it limits our preventative self-defense.
So Obama
Obama no longer does it.
Quo?
This evidence says that articulating that other countries do not perceive that right now. So articulating it is important.
Which card makes that? Which card
Makes
says
what?
that? Yeah, this
that
is
the ICJ.
Which card says that ICJ compulsory is like SQO stated policy, but nations still perceive preventative doctrine even though Obama's a Jimmy?
Okay, so
this is a really great card. I can't wait to read it.
Well, I mean, obviously that's not what the AF is. So the AF is a functional change from the status quo,
Which card
but
says
not in terms of
nations
preventative
perceive
self-defense.
Obama having a preventative war doctrine?
So there's a distinction
Yeah.
between preventative war still being on the books because Bush doctrine was
Sure,
never
sure, I
reversed,
get the
and whether or not we
distinction.
actually use preventative war. Our evidence
I get that. Your evidence
indicates
says on the books leads to perception.
Right. The
community,
No,
the
that's-
international community has
that's the
consistently
second
looked at.
part.
Okay,
The
okay.
first
I'm
part
just
of
asking
the one you
premise.
see.
First card in the one you see, the one
Yes.
from 2012 that said drones. Great.
No,
The Horde
I mean, it is
evidence.
about the Bush doctrine and the NSS that he used. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you can assert those on drones, but
I don't need press. Let me know if you got it. The order's going to be T authority and decay.
Did you press for file? Oh, never mind, I just got it.
Oh, this feels weird. Y'all got it.
I'm just waiting for it to actually open, but I downloaded it, yes.
Okay. No worries. I need to get this to get on.
Okay, and then T authority, not T with it, and then okay.
And then decay. I don't know. Why is it not going through? Give me a quick sec. I think I can give it another way to get internet. Right. I think we got it. Yes, yes we do. Great. We good? Cool. Oh. Hey, can I get that? Thanks. This F blows open the limit on the topic. Don't allow these affirmers that decide that they don't want to be any part of the topic. We have a specific interpretation of what the topic should look like in the context of authority, which is based off of the statute, the war powers authority based off of congressional and a judicial statute. Congress, of course, are the only way to dictate that bidirectionality shapes the way you evaluate this. The 2EC has dropped the Horowitz argument. The way that they have interpreted the topic allows for anyone to dictate how the restriction over the executive authority should actually look like, means that the negative is never able to prepare research, and research and predictability is critical to class, as well as meaningful education about the topic, which is the reason why you should vote on what they justify, not what they did.
did, especially actually what they did, because we weren't able to read in topic DA's interpretation of grammatical the verb phrase. Actually, the United States federal government should increase means that the subject of the grammatical phrase is the USFG means that is an independent statement for why our interpretation is more predictable now. They're Taylor 96 is a negative card. They do not have an interpretation. Besides, we get the executive counterpart. It's about permission, but the question is where that war powers authority comes from. That's the statute argument that the 1 in 10 to 2 EC drop the restriction is also a statutory definition. Law dictionary 13 statutory restrictions limits of different place activities ruling legislation. Resolve also means enactment of that. Whereas phrase 64 resolve is a similar word enacted by law. Increase also requires a net increase. The words of phrase 64 determine increase refers to net increase of capacity, energy commission not nor the increase in capacity. Also increase means a net increase. Rogers. I don't need to read that now. That also proves that there's at least a statutory baseline which sets a ceiling as well as a guideline and a bottom guideline for and a floor for how you evaluate this. Also, they don't mean judicial either. This is variant. It is Supreme Court of the granted the war powers decision statutory interpretation according to the executive word invalid because they violated statutory limitation there. And interpretation, if we can get the executive is super arbitrary and terminally bad. The argument that we can read our app on the negative is the argument that every K team on the topic has actually made, which is a reason why it moves the entirety of the topic, which is a reason also why I'm going for the reasonability is bad because of judge arbitration. Competing interpretation is the interpretation of how we should evaluate what is reasonable or not what is reasonable. Critique at the top. I am going for this argument because you have fundamentally only read a defense of liberalism as the most abstract sense without any answer to the criticism today. The absent-minded misdiagnosis based on fundamental flawed approach to social sciences there. Truth comes rest on the assumption that the nation state is a reference point of being able to comply with international relations. That is the way that they have articulated that the U.S. should comply with the ICJ. That ultimately corrupts because it props the agenda of methodological nationalism that makes it impossible to solve global problems. Critique disagrees in international relations should be constructed around the nation's point. The nation state BISA point is they have dropped extinction is number with 07 indicates that ultimately creates crisis of extinction because the way that we have delegated national authority to multilateral institutions like the ICJ or the WTO or the UN or the any kind of UN article charter is all based off of an understanding of nationalistic interpretation of multilateralism, which ultimately fails. It makes that sovereign's claims bankrupt if the nation state is wrong point of view, logically invalidates all of their sovereign's claims because it is impossible to craft the nation state solution to a fundamentally transnational problem because we are incapable of coming up with any kind of solution to a global crisis from the League of Nations, Copenhagen. These are all the reasons why they've ultimately failed. That means that the alternative precedes their advantage because epistemic framing is a prior question to any short-term impacts of the solving extinction building for calls for alternative approaches off the method of criticism alternatives been really working long-term whether the role of the political science is fully defined. The short-term is heating the latter requires heating against the states of mind. The comes off defeating the U.S. father wars against the allies supporting climate regimes back for the U.S. policy making off the states and instability that causes a need for an understanding of the failure of the role of Western states to play through a varied intervention. The key problems of policy making given the constraints of time of these factors led the policy makers to stuff to back is barely the source of information taken in second form a response to subject to some other concerns that the very reflective of the conditions given the problem which was remain in the attention from the Academy 2AC1 is framework. The judge is a critical intellectual. They evaluate the methodological assumptions of the 1AC that is critical policy actions are fundamentally tied to those assumptions. They have not answered the Beck and Steiner evidence that the way that we have made these normative claims about the states must be interrogated prior to any kind of outcome of the plan. The idea that we should focus on U.S. policy alone presumes that the government is a proper political actor, which ultimately guarantees us unit of analysis, which fails. Now, our methodological interpretation is better to understand how social violence is integrated into the post-globalized state. That is going to understand better. Ultimately, their plainly failed research and the Calendar 13. The way to exclude the old interpretation, the new way to exclude the old assumptions about the find the base of new non-formative research methodology, dominant understanding the cover that underpin policies are new words about the stating of characters or organized violence, about developing a new way to understanding and interpreting the association of interrelated characters, violence. First of all, military tech has made more. The war is increasing constructively difficult. And second, new forms of communication have made it easier to spread the fear and in the early periods. Hence terrorism. That globalization has thoroughly globalization not let them organize and say, but rather a transformation that made it to a model that entails sophisticated political, economic, military logic. That the debate is held to free find the formula, new scholarly analysis that have and an open new policy perspectives. It has an influence of policy debates taking place. What is still lacking is demanding of cosmopolitan political response to the rule of law. It depends on the norms of the local, national, global levels. The norms of are constructed through the scholarship and debate. Also, there's no groundless editorial content, and just as there's a parody, they should be prepared to defend their own methodology, holding the app accountable, critical to protect racist and sexist language. Also forces the app to narrow the debates that only the ones that they can defend is the foundation of any kind of productive debate whatsoever. The framing is critical. Critical engagement is substantially more important. Reality socially constituted. That means that there is an extinction impact to the 1EC that they have not been able to articulate the methodological assumption. 1EC has real effects such as trying to discourage this discussion means that we are not ready at the salient discussion of knowledge production, which means that there's a lack of meaningful education. Also, you should reject calls for immediate yes/no policy solution off the role of a global intellectual. It's the only way to solve reconsolidation and paradoxical ethical interaction in international relations. Business also the colonialism actually are overly considered security. There seems to be an amnesia about this one of the compulsory progression and participatory travel to construct ability to scholars who actually think politically as well as scholars need to develop global intellectual postures and super status quo. The construction of the public sphere, including the curtailment of this end of the way academic fear causing engagement role playing in the sharp battles make the larger advantage of power play. The most serious threat of the cult of expertise which are focused on the willingness to be succeeded by power that is simply not a matter of working with the larger question of orientalism, the orientation, the ethical question, irreducible for or against the race, scholars CTP, pay questions, where questions rather than offering solutions. Also state anti-epistemology means that there's no way that we can actually test the app because the imperial executive always brings the game against it, which is 13 the work that is following constructing incomplete scholarship, incomplete is determined by policy state and fundamental question about information due to reaction with key documents, then the obliteration evidence. These are practices efforts by any possible disclosure to institutionalize and censor or silence the voices of those who might name the violence that they are perpetrating. The U.S. government part of the withholding destroying information runs the full gamut of sensorial practices. I'll mark that at the practice 2AC number 2 is the white evidence. 2AC white evidence is only a question about what we should do as scholars, and the question of just the question of just epistemology. It is not only a question of epistemology, it is a question of how social sciences has been corrupted right now by the nation state, which is in fact turned above 2AC number 3 is the permutation group right now. Permutation doesn't make any sense. I'll do the alternative debate here because we do not have an alternative in the most traditional sense of the question, rather voting negative is a process of criticism that allows for a new space to open up as intellectuals to be able to understand how we should formulate new research agendas. Means that there is a total masking DA now. That means that only the alternative is able to solve the case while the permutation corrupts. The alternative was always the permutation. However, the permutation is severance or in because it means that they don't have to defend their ideology. Means that we're always representing to get any competition links to the planet's reach and trajectory. Also, you should not vote on judge choice because it creates anti-intellectual discussions. How they're not held accountable to any kind of discussion that they made in the one EC. They'll go the framework impact above the next argument. The framework also their permutation also locks in a form of path dependencies. There are global movements against neoliberal hegemony that are effective right now, but however they ultimately cause a path dependency on the institution which causes democracy, causes resource environmental collapse, extinction, shape, free, one to down economic model, lead to overshoot of the human resources, that lead to ecological catastrophe, rather research drives the top adjusting to new reality based extinction, common transfer, extinction, other species makes the planet uninhabitable, and ecological adjustment is happening to us, and while seeing ourselves are part of the ecological web, not outside the dominant model is based on conflict with the democracy, government, appeal to adjustment or oligarchies, strangle democracies, as well as crushing limits and covers the adjustment from a lower witness worldwide into the Arab Spring, and the occupied movements are rising up in response to the austerity purpose paradigm of there's another paradigm, the paradigm of increasing human well-being as well as increased austerity that helps with powerful totality, simplicity, enables us to enhance democracy. That means that the alternative takes a stance against international law as the most abstract sense. We solve all the reasons why international law is good and multilateralism are good, but if the plan corrupts it, is the reason why you should vote negative on presumption iniquity. 9. The evolution of national is not suggested to shift towards cosmopolitan features centered on the collective human security, the cosmopolitan framework that is warehouse global population combinations rather than being fragmented into arbitrary nations, state and different security, the associated security of global warrior, the cosmopolitan peace scheme will answer many criticisms level that the realist peace scheme and represent the most viable solution in future humanity to arrive this around cosmopolitan represent the puzzle was failing in the direction that will translate the states and territories. Cosmopolitan represent viable solution limitation realist fragment within cosmopolitan is representative of position. Cosmopolitan certainly solves the problem that you call it that cosmopolitan is the definition but does not sponsor the organization of global citizens motivated by solidarity. It's much more useful for scholars to make a cosmopolitan or framework where considering the future of our planet. Now the next argument is that whether liberalism is good or wrong. They have a fundamentally bankrupt view of scholarship. It's terminally wrong. I'll read a really long creative grade 11. Mass violence in reference to Southeast Asia was a civilization wrecked by the new colonial conflict. The Second World War was followed by over 40 years of peace in North America and Europe. The invasion, the same with the Russian studies, exported the population studies and highly developed works where the conflicts where the war the entire time, not only Indochina, other parts of Asia, Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Korean War, invasion of Tibet, British counterinsurgencies, Malaysia, Kenya, Franco, British invasion, Suez, Anglo Civil War, the Afghan Civil War in the Congo, Guatemala, 6-Day War, Soviet invasion, Hungary and Czechoslovakia, the Iran-Iraq War, Soviet Afghan War, only some of the conflicts during which great powers presented rivalries with the end of the Cold War that and the removal of the Soviet Union from the Sea War, and the Canadian First Cold War, the Balkan Wars, Chechnya, Iraq War, Afghanistan, Kashmir, among other conflicts taken together. These conflicts have the formidable sum of violence for Franco. They are peripheral arguments of violence only the out. And there's the rest of the scientific investigation. Notice is more important to option particular view of the world, our market view of the world. That their methodological assumption of social sense empirically fails because it causes it conflates subjective factors that creates inadequate appearance details and at first the following theories produce little in the way and useful results of human even the most generalization on closer trip with the sustain of the setting any consensus about the theory of particular theory rests on the mistaken knowledge between the phenomenal rational relation. They are consensus polarity are most likely used, but they are no commonly accepted definition measures without consensus. Almost every high culture have too much wiggle room through the analysis of social science. Theories are built on idealization that cannot be anchored to observable phenomena. Those truths are not discovered in reality, implicit theories that do not exist. And that's exist.
So the alternative engages in a new form of epistemology. What does that look like?
A new form of epistemology means that we would focus our research agenda on the kind of scholarship we produce on more cosmopolitan solidarity.
What does cosmopolitan?
Cosmopolitan solidarity means that you don't take yourself as an American citizen trying to align yourself with the ICJ. You take yourself as a global citizen who is aligned against government institutions that are hegemonic and oppressive.
So all institutions, all governmental institutions are hegemonic?
I mean, if they're founded off nation state, absolutely.
Okay, so all like ICJ, NATO, anything like that?
In the most abstract senses, international law could be good, but the way that nation states have altered and arranged the agenda, only fitting the puzzle pieces within their own nation state agenda, means that international law corrupts itself.
So how does the alt solve the case?
Well, the alternative means that we are students and educators, not deciding between whether policies are good or bad. We get to change our research agenda based off of more non-nation state-based research.
What's a mechanism that would, for example, get rid of things like the UN or ICJ?
Get rid of the UN? Why would we get rid of the UN?
Well, what's wrong with the UN then?
It's that it's driven by national interests.
Alright, how do you alter their calculation?
Well, hopefully we can research better, not focus on the nation state.
Researching better is the endpoint of your method?
We're intellectuals, we're students. We don't have hands on the, proverbial levers of power.
So Shiva says that the current neoliberal order will cause economic overshoot. What does the alternative do to resolve that?
Well, hopefully it means that we don't try to mess with them using
what's
bureaucratic
the
power
leap
plays.
From the 1AC to neoliberal?
Well, there are path dependencies that you lock in, right? Ideological path dependencies. There's a conflict of interest going on in the status quo between anti-hegemonic movements such as Occupy, Arab Spring, other movements that are going on in the so-called third world peripheral countries, actually what cosmopolitan authors use. But the way that the 1AC tries to lock in a national agenda means that those movements inevitably fail because they don't have the legitimacy necessary.
The argument that international institutions are net bad.
So this is a secondary question,
Yeah.
not related. Okay. From League of Nations, Copenhagen, WTO, UN, Article Geneva Conventions, these all fail. Like they have never been able to contain a crisis. Iraq, did you read that super long ass card that I read that said all of the crises since post World War II proxy conflicts? Superpowers obviously don't go to war anymore, but they go to conflicts in third world peripheral countries that allows those violences to go unseen and escalate inevitably. Well, it's because they use international law and multilateralism to drive that agenda and not do anything about it. Well, we would that's a relevant question. We don't question whether ILAW is good or bad. We question whether you've corrupted ILAW or not.
What does it mean to corrupt ILAW?
Corrupt ILAW using the national interest. Like every example I've brought up, why the League of Nations,
So the
UN.
plan is not in the interest of the U.S. Is that like the app?
No. It's not like your AF was constructed by the military-industrial complex. It's not as simple as that. It's that your AF tries to reorganize international law and rehabilitate it under U.S. interest.
We'll take a second to
I did not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Boom.
Thank you.
Prevented dropping condos. One step at a time.
Yeah. Move this way. Oh, right.
Where do the judges have conditionality float? I had them on the counter. Is that incorrect?
Where are you going to do it?
Boom. We'll do it on the counter. So the order is the Ukraine decided, politics decided, counter plan, solvency, territory, successive force.
Solvency
what? Territories, excessive force, advantage 2, advantage 1.
Alrighty.
Okay. Yeah, I was.
Oh, thanks.
3 seconds.
Okay. Whew. Is everyone ready? Everyone ready? Alright. Ukraine decided not going for links about Congress and there's no impact to the Ukraine crisis, not go to the politics, this there's no impact to the economy, our evidence and no this takes all the resource conflict evidence because it indicates that nations cooperate in times of crisis. Now go to the counter plan. We're not going for a permutation, just as competition. I'll answer conditionality here, interpretations of the negative 2 conditional adequacies. That's obviously necessary, especially the NDT in the face of new affirmatives, which is an independently voting issue because it robbed our ability to have a genuine discussion of the affirmative, which means that it's a potential voting on a bad policy option. That means that disclosure is necessary in order to create a better round. Also, conditionality is good, increases argument argument, testing and in-depth argument, testing from both sides is necessary. Obama held here debate proves that need to be able to test from the left and the right. Our interpretation there we're allowed to have two conditional adequacies. Testing from both angles is necessary. The defensive arguments that time and strategy skew are inevitable, and alternative things like topicality mean that the times use inevitable reject the argument. Not that team conditional is also the key to negative flexibility and strategizing, which outweighs affirmative ground because infinite prep and new affirmatives mean that the affirmative is always going to be one step ahead, which is the reason why conditionality is necessary to get us back to square one. Now there's no risk of Russia war evidence. That's your Ukraine impact D. Solvency. You should have read this with the drones app, not your app. That's kind of embarrassing. The United States preemption doctrine is obviously talking about drones. That's their own evidence. This means that it takes out both the root cause of their excessive force argument and their ICJ evidence. This is the reason why you vote negative on presumption, because the continued policy of the United States to drone strike individuals is what is determining preemptive self-defense. Frisk and 13, a norm toward preventative self-defense is escalating. Emulation of the United States assertion of the right to preventive use of force. There's been a shift away from the United States' use of drones, finding revealing states are applying the strategy of preventive self-defense beyond UAVs to target killing to extreme contingency plan for nuclear war. Specifically, use ad bellum in the context of drones is what is enabling nations to proliferate, which means that even if the affirmative restraint to armed forces, they'll still point to our drones. ACLU and 13. Outside an armed conflict, the United States can only target individuals who pose an threat. The administration statements raised fundamental concern about whether recognized conflicts in the law administration statements cover the United States government to bar an interpretation and investment use that bill, which involves separate and recorded violation of sovereignty. Law prevents the use of force in the territory of other states. Some leave force without host, so long as the host state is unable and unwilling to broad determine it could be consistent with international law. Officials recognize targeted killing policies will set a precedent for other nations, particularly as weaponized drone technology become more available. Lowering the threshold for use of force outside armed conflict could be a breach of international law, setting a dangerous precedent, weakening the government's ability to target legal constraints on the legal target operation of the force. Now this takes out both their advantages. First, it takes out their excessive force argument, because all their internal links are about nations at the brink of war using the precedent for preventative self-defense. That's a quote from their evidence. Second is it takes out their ICJ warrant. It takes out their ICJ advantage, because this is all predicated on the United States having credibility, acceding to ICJ, and that increases the ICJ's credibility. That was cross-examination. If we win that drones destroy the United States credibility, then it takes out the warrant. So why the plan solves ICJ credibility, because they would still point to our drones, be like, screw you, even if you're still in the ICJ. It's a reason as to why you don't solve now independently the notion of this restraining armed forces alone as a notion of ending militarization is the link. The notion that we can only articulate certain forms of militarization causes a circumvention to worse forms of violence. Cuba and 11 restriction on right weapon related to the concession of broad authority, legal military technology prohibition can be understood to left progressive and next reinforce security frame and legitimize more provided the categories weapon constructed to precisely the extent the United States circumcised the commitments they've been from the legitimized effective weapons having without being unduly constrained by the specific regulatory requirements for right weapons regulation and not assigned type regulation arms require the reverse and evaluation of overall impact of such regulation to take into account the relationship between the power weapon and the broader system. Power right weapons are depicted as the antithesis as legitimized overall weapon system station work to delineate other weapons and highlight the profound limits of the such appropriate and the extra securitization for taking facilities and securitization made weapon trade for the made during the current framework of control. But I think at the same time creating a space for problemization, arm control, transfer, intervention by the campaign, cluster war munitions, successful war, since with Thomas security paradigm, arm criticism, we're downgrading radical critique in exchange for the radical forms, tacit with the tactical reforms of the security paradigm that justified individual with the exception of token action, leaving the vast accumulation of Western armaments on problematized. There needs to be a far greater problematization, capabilities in a strategic conception of global militarism rather than tactical video depending on accommodation of language and new security paradigm of military humanism. That's the reason is why his arguments about why drones don't link is the link, and reason why they don't solve now go to the territorial advantage. The thesis of this advantage is that the status quo is going to cause distinction because tit for tat nations disputes are going to escalate. This proves that the unstable nature of the structure in a try or die, because if it's so true that tit for tat escalations across the globe are going to blow up at any minute because of a friggin' 2003 Bush doctrine. That's the reason as to why you vote negative, because it means try or die for the negative, because it means that the presidents are unsustainable for independent reasons. This also is a reason as to why it's necessary for the net affirmative here to isolate a brink and a trigger impact to their specific impacts, but because there's no scenario as to when these wars are going to escalate. They're all based on the Bush doctrine, which is a reason as to why the criticism accesses this as prior, because it's a systemic question. It also has a bigger magnitude problem. Now the link is that simple legal interpretation. So this is the link that simple legal interpretation solve the phenomenon of war. This creates legal path dependency and justifies state of exception. We critique their notion of war as an event. Does the act and 10 wartime is an area tolerated governments of the president to power expense how you temporary war and event in American legal with all the problems trials. Understand how about more attention lays to the state of exception around wartime today viewing wars and exception leads to the northern persons in war. Wartime normal means law during war. As we see practice rather suspension of central metaphors. This one even works of revision the same or a different way to continue believing that becomes a general structure and pace. Wartime please another finds it hard when the American state is not distributed unpacking war territory leads to the balance of that and successfully in a relationship between the law. Also, the international law is incapable of dealing with resisting with U.S. imperialism. That means U.S. accession to ICJ only co-ops ICJ and turns to Smith and international law is a vehicle for dominance, but the bigger house not a means for progressive opposition, legal equality, mass sexual contest, and a legal contest in the nation of the greatest power likely to win between legal rights and force defense of no self international law appealing to self therefore incapable of resisting the United States using international law institution as a justification. That is a reason why ongoing status quo disputes will fail if the United States receive. Now there's no impact arguments in the case of South China Sea and Asian resource wars won't escalate because China is cooperative in the status quo. Also, our Chandler evidence indicates that those disputes fail. There's no impact to resource wars. Else, econ collapse, and our evidence indicates that resource crunch goes inward, and there's no impact to warming. It's too late. That CO2, China's and all calls in. Our evidence indicates that adaptation solved. Now, the sense advantage. This is all answered by the drones advantage. Their Carroll evidence from the 2AC also takes it out because it says that Obama's not using excessive bush doctrine in the status quo, and that's perceived internationally. That takes out the impact because it means that we're not using excessive force with military, but we are using it with drones. There's no back to the Middle East. Our evidence indicates that leaders are conservative and that empirics has proved that there has been escalation. There's also no impact to Indo-Pac war. Evidence indicates deterrence and multiple miscalculations have been disproven. There's no impact to China-Taiwan war. Evidence indicates that China is taking a soft power line that says, quote, it's the reason why they're going to be peaceful. We'll concede China's soft power is inevitable. That they didn't concede the argument that it makes China peaceful inevitably, which takes out all their impacts to Asia, and it's the reason why the K comes first.
02? Maybe.
T, the counter plan were the new apps that they're using.
Yeah.
ICJ.
It was great.
I don't know what that one side did. The ICJ credibility advantage, the self-defense preventative or Bush doctrine advantage, solvency, the K.
So let me just make sure. This is where he would second, or your one of your case on advantages is where he would second and then first.
What was it? I'm sorry, I just didn't hear you.
So is it the inverse of Lee's case advantage?
I believe it is.
Okay, I just wanted to say.
Yeah.
Counterplan, territories, excess on.
Alright. Not good?
Well, the TRC is absolutely incoherent. I have no clue what to do. What the violation is as per the 2NCU should accept the interpretation. You only have to do as much as the resolution mandates, which means you don't have to mandate the mandate which statutes restrict, which is the authority and tailor evidence. They say T equals the increases the expanded number, quantity, or degree, which means the ICJ is not currently restricting card on that except increase to become larger number, quantity, or degree, resolve the specific course of action, A and D, and 6 reach decision to make a determination, resolve a court of action, counter interpretation for judicial restrictions, right? Court action, the limits action. There's no int in the resolution. Judicial powers more than Supreme Court includes all actors who exercise judicial powers regime, and now the judicial would not immediately have court can decide judicial the judges, the judiciary does not include all persons including exercise judicial power, functional limits, solve all the office have to be solved. The applicant, the ICJ is a massive administrative been sitting on its asses, choose you research, or do they say ground but domestic courts are part of the topic's dead. Everyone figured out the amendment counterplan states affluence always net ground pledge. Net gets special advantage of blocking modern debate means that there can be a ranking conditionality process and other sheet counterplans. They can be also known to photo theory. These structural arguments dominate any ground loss and solve limited arguments. You should default to reasonably. Your job is to create an accurate drop in topic, not the best one because best is necessary to direct and create a race from the negative to bastardize the topic to ensure net ground means that they will always find interpretation creates one less topical after some one more linked to politics and intellectual regress. Also, your job is to make the job easier for the negative to make sure debate isn't impossible even if they would compete interpretation evaluate through unto reasonability means they would see the interpretation, not just the interpretation side of the wrong. The two error makes massive amounts of legal implication of how incoherent. Then go to the counter. New option not voting issue. A subpoint is a subpoint is a community norm not to disclose especially at the NDT increases competitive incentives to do more research before the NDT you know you don't get out of being lazy and pre-run prep does not save your ass. Go to the ICJ counterplay. The ICJ credibility advantage outweighs any risk of the nebulous K impact. South China Sea and Seneca conflicts are escalating now. There's massive levels of terror disputes. These outweigh type of rational interests because things like oil and stuff are key to their economies. They're likely to escalate least of great power with no system defense. Mutual deterrence does not solve any of these in a quick time frame. The ICJ credibility is uniquely key. The Sengoku evidence is fantastic that the multiple regional calculation labels have. They say the app must isolate a link trigger. I did that above. There can see there's no link triggers to the other advantage, but it's not context of the context that happen. Drones does not take out as part of the ICJ because the question of use submitting stuff to use of force over that was sufficient to solve causes massive risk. They say electronic restriction. The ICJ is cooperative status quo means no uniqueness. This will also be answered on the K. Go to the next page. They say the advanced advantage. Not going for this advantage. Bush doctrine did not need to consider no nebulous impact. Does not take it out. They say that the soft power doesn't take out China either because it's rational. It just outweighs the resources. Solvency. Drones do not isolate the terrorists. It's only a question of reinvigorate the ICJ. Drones may be have also you can see the spillover claim, but the plan would also result in the restriction of the use of force and also stop the self-defense norms, which means there's no justification for it decided to happen. Go to the cable. 2 cards is not constantly sufficient. One is the argument, which means you should justify that it happened. Second of all, I have no clue what this argument is besides that we would endorse a new form of scholarship. There are two decides that way. First is that cross-examination answer said that it's bad for the U.S. students to award the U.S. That should be a more cost-palatable impact. Means that if I win, the ICJ is against U.S. interests. We win. Murphy Day, developing states and the court states for not on military economic power to advance the interest embracing the court's prize the need for resolving this and showing developing states means restricting for power to develop states and one court prize and developing states to leverage will not always have developing nations strongly favor the court states that are willing to use it against powerful states. Also, discussion of war does not displace focus on structural violence and allows injection of complexities, not hierarchical barcode and 12. It tells the idea that it focus on violence, the value of violence, why not about the obvious and steady wars, obscure wars, more specific about targeted violence in general. The violence of war and patriarchy is where the relation form violence, which other types of acts ultimately the source of war generating social powers, broad focus on violence, decision for risk of losing the central singular character of violence. Where these institutions are inevitable, there's no challenges, no movements, which means there's zero risk of the alternative or doing new types of research will all of a sudden make the world better. It's a question of incremental reforms like the plan or can solve. I can very love judges of emerging pairs and also face American letter they face broader international war highly developed science integrated institutions like the rooted in the war but not unusually capable of assimilating rising powers practicing political and cultural perceived as China rises terror contest usage the deeper international order remains intact for these states. The roots of modernity runs there's not a way for the existing international order of each state to can't turn the can't seem to turn the out. You can see the ICJ acts in conflict dividend, which means there's no risk of internal risk having the same extinction level, but the ICJ is able to solve this also. The last 200 years to disprove any type of their unities go to the framework to make the role of the balance to determine whether or not the actualization of the affirmative is a good idea versus the actions from competitive methods applied to a broader institutional system. I have no clue what doing more research will possibly do. If he cannot isolate simply the tune or what he does to take down UN nation state practices, you should not put out any level of validism with the affirmative acts. The arbitrary self-serving is the point of missing entirety act in May. Well, serve which is the impact we want to see. Then read also briefly some what is particularly skirts in the discussion of war power topic education, which is why this is not under question. But to extend the white evidence, you should evaluate the alternative based on its ability to engage the institutions of one of the eyes society exists externally for individual beliefs. Institutions create expectations of behavior that shape macro level interactions and structural trends. The pedagogy will only be valid for having method for engaging institutions to drive broad scale human habits. Debate doesn't leave the room to judge the intellectual value to people. We agree with what we want to see. It's a question of how you actualize that and where to pretend to. They say a prior question, but not a prior question. A sequence key to right progressive policy negatives, but offers based on plan or representation, which should not be allowed to use us as office independent plan. Based on which pedagogy is not existence policy or the endpoint method that repeated the plan is implicitly tied to different periods. Also, their interpretation means that we never get to the second one of first order politics career and meta theories, parasitic, and non-produced to backgrounds of our, and also lead the racing and living the taking the right answers. Is little practice and scholarship, little practice and method theory, or discourse. The way we complete this sport is due to the inherent foundation, tendency, and problematic nature of meta theory arguments that are probably the meta theory distorts space and theoretical nature of meta theory prejudice induced with understanding position or prejudge based on the medical theory commitments. The plan is straight up use support all indicators prove the liberals of nation state focus solves organ and that weird one of the most peaceful periods the compilation and the notion of horse things, liberty horse things, large culture from non-knowledge cultural now helping us eradicate there been no worse there no worse than major power reasons sex reasons clear down return the controversial session to previous is striking the states about loss resolving disputes one is the sort of democratic government economic opportunities rise the increasing demands of resources which lead social and life sciences globalization made this increasingly pathetic towards other trends are positive and then
so can you send us those cards?
oh wait we don't know what they are. I'm really sorry. Yeah,
it's all good.
I'm gonna mark the free card for you too.
How much time you got, Wade? I mean, you don't have to start until she gives it to me.
Lee, you're keeping track?
7, right?
6:54. Great. Alright. Then you want to let us know when you send it out?
What's fun is it'll be for me to wait around for that. I'm going to leave in the interim.
Okay, I hit the send button. I'm sorry, I just hit reply to one person, not everybody. So
Did you just go to Lee? No, I don't
Yeah,
think I got it.
It went just to Berser.
okay, I don't know what happened. But I just sent it. I can pull it up on my
We
computer.
haven't gotten it yet, so we'll just keep waiting for Berser.
Are you all prepping? Because they haven't gotten it done
Oh,
yet.
I'm sorry. I didn't listen to it.
Did that send? Did you get a success?
Yeah.
Did you get it?
I just got it.
Everyone's like, yeah.
Y'all good?
Yeah.
without breaking.
Questionable. But yeah.
Richard, I'm gonna hand this to you when I think you read this.
Ready? Okay. If you don't know what I was saying in the 2NT, that's probably a reason why you're gonna lose. They have dropped extinction, impact, extinction to genocide and mass wars means that it's required right. Nationalist engagement necessitates creation of the racialized hierarchy to West, non-West, good, evil, human, non-human, disauthorized mass violence under the quote-unquote liberal guise of multilateralism or international law, spreading Western values who are with us or against us mentality that ultimately means that their scenarios for war and conflict or only political backbone justify the elimination of everyone deemed as a threat to Western values, which is Groats, Oates evidence in the 1NT as well as the gray evidence in the 2NT. Traditional magnitude assessments are received in nationalist logic, which is the reason why they're all or nothing, try or die. eye scenarios are all manufactured, which is the reason why you should ultimately defer negative here. They have not answered the last miswatch of the first Milligan card I read that the policymakers, we have a structural antagonistic bias towards short-term impact calculus, which is the reason why you should reject it and focus on only long-term scenarios. Long-term scenarios means that it's a try or die, because it means that as policymakers, which is the actual stack it up debate game that we have played, that you have lost this round because their short-term focus means that we have a cognitive bias towards short-term bias. That means that they have a misdiagnosis based on a flawed approach to how social sciences should actually function. Our role as students should be able to actually interrogate the way that we create research agendas. That means that their truth comes just on a flawed assumption of the nation state as the referent point for international law. You should frame all of their try or die scenarios to the question of whether international law can solve it at all, because the U.S. would inevitably corrupt that kind of international law in the first place. Now, the one here cannot read a no structural violence defensive argument because that was an argument in the 1 NC, but however, their argument about the trade-off argument is not our link argument. It is that when we focus on great power logic, it ultimately sidesteps those escalatory structural violence that go on in the status quo. I read a long list of post-colonial, post-Cold War II forms of structural violence that happen as a result of proxy conflicts through the great power wars. That means that you should err negative here. That impacts social science arguments. Now I'll impact it here. Before you get to any of the other impacts, of Bernstein argument takes out the entirety of the case because the way that they've interpreted predictions are entirely flawed, because it rests on the understanding of it understands relations through effect and cause, not cause and effect. Means that they have a flawed interpretation of how impacts happen in the first place. Now, before I get to the rest of the argument, two dropped arguments. One is that they have not answered a floating pick argument, the Inaguchi argument. I started here because the alternative takes a stake and only international law in the most abstract sense, because cosmopolitanism is able to solve the reasons why international law is good, but however, when it is based off of a more realist nationalist agenda, it corrupts the way that it operates. That is the reason why I said the alternative was the permutation law. The 1EC corrupts that permutation. If the alternative solves the terminal impacts of the case better, means that there is no try or die scenario for the affirmative. That's Inaguchi's second argument, is they have not answered the global movements argument. This is a path dependency argument that I flagged that it is critical to be able to solve democracy as well as resource wars, environment collapse, and terminal extinction because of resource overcrunch. Shiva evidence indicates that there are rising movements against the liberal hegemony right now, but the app ultimately creates a path dependency that's ideological based, which ultimately recreates the flawed interpretation of how international law functions in the first place, which is impacted by the rest of the one in our cards. I think Lee read a lot of good one in our cards that talks about how international law ultimately is shaped through nationalism, which means that they can't solve now their next argument. Their Murphy card is too generic, too abstract. Institutions are obviously inevitable. What is the question of how should we engage in those institutions and whether we should be able to continue to justify those institutions as students. Incremental reform ultimately fails. Their John and Perry card is just about how we should change the institution, doesn't take into account how they get corrupted. You do not have an answer to that argument, which I flagged in 2NC. The idea that you can just shape the ICJ is incorrect, means that we can't just abstractly engage down there. I can Perry, the argument is definitely a negative argument. It only makes a uniqueness argument for us. It says that there's a U.S.-led system. I can Perry, loving the outer project of construction of liberal order, which over the last few centuries led by the UK and the U.S., which is the 20th century by the liberal democracy, the Westphalian projects are on solving the realist problem, creating a stable cooperative interstate relation under condition of anarchy, the original principle of Westphalian state sovereignty, territorial integrity, non-intervention, reflected in emerging consensus that states were the rightful political units for the established illegitimate rule through war and settlement. The great powers learn how to operate within the multi-parallel power system. That means that there is the same structure of a liberal international order that they re-perpetuate affirmative debate. They do not get the affirmative. Just viewing the implementation of the AF as reason recreates a bad form of educational model that we have way too specific evidence how policy debate should actually go down. One is that our interpretation is judges a critical intellectual, that their interpretation links to the critical because it means that they have fundamentally relied on the policy outcomes as being the tie to the assumption as the nation state, which means that it relies on the USFG, which our Beck and Schneider evidence means must be interrogated prior to the affirmative. There are three offensive arguments. One is that we link to their war powers part of the top. The Caldwell evidence says that post-globalized states, we have a better interpretation of how social violence is integrated within that. Their interpretation of violence is fundamentally flawed, means that they can't access any of the case. Visa point is their immediate yes-no policy action ultimately means that it results in bureaucratic power management play and allows reconsolidation of empire, which is our Biswa says that you should reject because you are a global intellectual. Visa point is they can't access their case even if they win their framework because they're a state anti-epistemologies that ultimately re-corrupt the affirmative because it hides the truth from it. Now they can't solve their app anyways. That'll start this argument here. Drones collapse U.S. credibility turns to reason why we solve ICJ. That is one in our argument that they have not answered very well. It means that we are not restrained and forced. The one in our argument that they end drones is way too new. If it was in a 2EC, we would have impact turn and said drones are go too late. Fisk and Rochman says, and ACLU says that it undercuts solves because of the impact turn because it means that they become a pariah weapon that allows us to shift ourselves to other kinds of more devastating weapons. Now that means that there's a conceded DA to nationalism because drones become a disadvantage. Allows for continual structural violence that causes extinction. Now the Smith evidence impacts our impact turns our Murphy evidence because it says that U.S. nationalism ultimately corrupts those international settings. Now
you have to read that line.
And it dicks over developing states because it's a unique case turn because our Murphy evidence says that developing states are using the ICJ right now, but U.S. bias is causing ICJ failure. Now the defensive arguments on framework first, no ground loss because of editorial content and just framing now means that we should not be able to skirt those discussions. It is critical to check those racist sexist language. Their freer crowd out argument is laughable. We've had critique debates a lot, and theory is critical to be able to interpret that. They lead to a crowd out over just policy arguments. Now I don't think the one here said permutation, but it's either severance or intrinsic loss. We're asking looking at the laws for the path dependency now there. Link to an argument there. Morgan card, I'm glad I got here with a lot of time left because it's also defense of liberal international order. Liberal international order, we have already articulated is the reason why you should vote negative, because liberal international order in the most abstract sense obviously means that it is a good thing to be resolved those problems, but interpreting it through a more nationalist agenda allows for the corruption of that, which means that they can't access any part of their case, which is the reason why it's a try for negative.
ACLU says drone probe cause extinction.
I've already said why drones cause extinction.
Boom. Or you can see that.
All of them? You know it better than I do. That was the least helpful.
I know, I'm so sorry.
You guys can sound like Doc with it. What'd you say, Brisbane?
Just. Good. Anyone not good? Cool. The case outweighs the terminal impact of the critique. If we win any of our arguments about the ICG being valuable for de-escalating conflict situations in Asia, then then it impacts turns the entirety of the truth claims of the case, because it proves that there is a valuable endpoint of international institutions. The credibility of the ICJ is key to stave off Asian resource wars, because a credible ICJ can act to intervene in conflicts and defuse tense territorial disputes by being a diplomatic forum that has a mechanism to resolve conflicts away from the court. The Wani Mitchell evidence says that even if they don't use the court, it increases the long-term structural bias that they diffuse conflicts with truths, that there's value to the Wani. Now I'm going to do the framework debate here because I think it's the only place that we can lose the debate. You should evaluate the adverse and competitive method as applied to a broader institutional system first. Their interpretation boosts the F because they can just say that they will research about it later and that solves the F. That is not a valuable endpoint. Second is that it skirts discussion of board powers and topic education, which outweighs any of their nebulous research arguments. Third, obviously the Wani and the alternatives don't leave the room, which means it's a question of which method creates a better pedagogical model for engaging the world. Only questioning the way that options interact with larger institutions is valuable for creating social change. The 2AC White evidence says that reality
exists as an intersection of social constructions, only forcing changes at a larger level, i.e., the United States and the ICJ produces a valuable pedagogy for ways to create avenues for political change. This is especially true in the context of the international liberal order. The Wanty Eikenberry evidence says that the international system is structured such that some forms of the international system is inevitable, which means it's just a question of how we engage that system. There's not intrinsic value in investigating research or methodology unless there is some endpoint of that research. Yes, the U.S. Now their rereading of the Eikenberry evidence. Yes, the United States is responsible for some of the messed up portions of the system, but that does not mean that we're just turning our heads away solves it. There is nothing useful about simply pointing out the problems with the 1AC, which is what the critique is. There is no endpoint. The freer evidence read in the 1AR says that yes, it is very easy to critique different things, but that never gets to the second level, which is first order political action of actually translating that into institutional change. Now he says they access extinction. This was answered in the 1AR. The ICJ solves it. That was all explained above. If it is true that the ICJ is able to defuse all terminal impacts, then you should vote AF on purchase. You should vote AF even if there's some structural violence, because you should be willing to forefront. You should be willing to forefront that. I'll answer the structural violence arguments here. The liberal norms are good and effective. The 1AR Horgan evidence says the world is structurally improving because the liberal international order has created a shift away from war as a mechanism for advancing a state's interest. Interstate war and structural violence have drastically decreased. It cites the most recent data about the way that the last several decades have operated. You should prefer the data to Min's nebulous claims about structural violence in the 2NR. This also disproves the causality of all their link arguments, because if it is true that the United States and all these other legal bodies have existed in the status quo, then it disproves the offense of any of their link arguments. This is also offense against the critique, because it says that the nation state is the reason that the incentives of nation states have transformed actors away from violence. The 2AC Shia evidence confirms this argument by citing game theory, because states have a larger incentive to cooperate and react rationally in any situations of violence. They say we focus on short-term. They say we focus on short-term instances of violence. This might be true, but at worst, it is defense against our claims. I think they have conceded the terminal inevitability claim that wars will break out at some point, which means the ICJ is necessary to diffuse those conflicts and also improve structural violence, because war obviously turns structural violence because it creates a worse world, because it kills massive numbers of people. Now there should be a link trigger for the way that you evaluate any of their arguments. Yes, the status quo might be bad, but the negative is just reading links. The negative is doing that, just reading links to the status quo, not the plan mechanism. The 1AR Murphy evidence says that the plan drastically changes the way the international law operates, because it gives other states an avenue to challenge United States legal practices, which might be true that right now things are really messed up, but the plan is a net step better. This is also proven by 200 years of the liberal international order, and none of their terminal impact arguments are being true. Now he says floating pig. This was extremely unclear in the 2NC. I do not think it rose to the threshold that you can automatically reduce or reject this. Even if he gets it, you should allow new 2AR answers, because voting on it is just a bad cheap try. It also doesn't solve any of our offense, because all of our offense is. It moves the entirety of the app. We obviously have a defense of the app in the system, which means that you should reject the floating peg. It also does not solve any of the app or any of our Horgan offense, because if it is true that it picks out of the nation state, that does not solve any of the macro level interactions between states. Now you should be able to answer two questions about the alternative before you're comfortable voting negative. First is, tell me what the difference between the alternative and the app is, other than that they don't focus on some nebulous claim of the nation state. Second is, how do you get to that endpoint of not focusing on that? Why is that effective? If you cannot answer those questions, you should feel extremely uncomfortable voting negative. Now he says global movements against neoliberalism coming down. I think I've answered this above two warrants. First is the world is structurally improving. Second is that even if the world is not structurally improving, it is even if the world is not structurally improving, it is true that the ICJ is able to solve the terminal impact to any of those arguments. He says that institutions get corrupted. What does this seriously mean? Even if institutions are corrupted, that just proves the necessity of the 1AC and reforming those institutions. Now, yeah, the ICJ has consistently ruled against use of force and the United States, which means that it would obviously rule against the United States in the future. Now, there's a drugs argument. It does not collapse ICJ credibility, because the ICJ would never rule on it, or never has. So the United States submitting that it's under compulsory jurisdiction of the ICJ is sufficient to solve, which is the 1AC Meyer evidence. They do not have any evidence about the ICJ, which means that you should defer to specificity. The nebulous circumvention argument, or shift to larger weapon systems argument, there is no impact to it, because if it is true that the app does not resolve drones, which is an argument that I will concede, then there'd obviously be no circumvention or shift. He says epistemology, that was all answered above. There's no positive value of just pointing out what's wrong with the 1AC unless they can propose an alternative method that would solve it.
Yes.
Can I have the 1 NC on the K and
Of course.
block on the K?
Great.
Can you throw in the advantage stuff as well?
If you're gonna put this around.
Wait, can you throw in the advantage stuff as well?
Okay, cool. I understand. Okay. So like this. Like that. Okay. Does that make sense? Awesome. Thank you. Like this is the document. Yeah. Great. And then this. Okay. Actually, yeah. You should.
You sent this? Yeah.
I sent you an email.
You do an email?
No, I sent you.
Oh, you sent it?
Hmm?
Well, no.
Were you not on the speech doc, Roka?
Was not. No.
Huh.
Sounds great.
Where did you send it, Richard?
I sent it to nryan2wc.
You label the subject as.
Well, would you like me to send it to a different Nick Ryan?
No, I mean that's where I went. I was just trying to figure out if it got filtered somewhere.
Gotcha.
I got it.
There it is.
color of highlighting is the Reach and Doyle card?
The blue.
It's the blue. Where's the mark in the Morgan card? Or the Horgan card?
The one arrow card.
Yeah, where's the mark in it?
There's like a weird space in the card.
Space in the card. Oh, is it at the end?
Yeah, it's
The
like
last
really-
sentence, okay.
it's like one line.
Yeah, yeah. And is it the blue or the yellow?
Oh, reread the blue.
Okay.
Would you read on Reiki and oil? Yellow, blue, both?
Which one?
Blue.
What's up, dude? Thanks, man. It's pretty good.
Where's the weird mark on Oregon?
It's at the end, it's like the last sentence.
No, I just.
Do you see like
yeah,
the
yeah,
stuff
yeah,
at the
yeah.
end, yeah?
And I have that stopping point.
Saying no. Dip it.
No, I'm staying. I'm just setting up. Yeah, I got a charger.
super like every war card.
I'm sorry, I have no clue what that means.
He's just like
Oh yeah, I think Richard could probably answer this question.
Richard, you're just like it's caused every war since World War II. What card is that card?
That's the gray left card.
The one in C card. No, that's. Hold on.
Oh, did I just do that? It says liberal internationalism violent. Gray, GRAY.
Yeah.
Is that pizza?
You want these?
Pizza. I'd love some.
You guys love these?
Thank you much, sir.
No problem.
You want some of this? Is that dinner?
I don't know, man. I just took some pictures.
Is that dinner served?
Hmm?
Is dinner served?
No,
The
no,
tournament
no,
will not
no.
provide dinner.
Okay. You know, I haven't even used this thing. I'm good, thank you though.
No, you have for breakfast. When you
Oh,
open
but
up
I
the-
like doing good breakfast.
Nobody's gonna pick one. Alright, rolling.
Pretty good.
Does that mean everyone's in? Okay.
Who are they debating? Who?
Yeah, Andre's
Where did Richard go?
Oh God. I thought it was yours.
Oh my god, this may take forever.
About that time.
Crap. Congratulations to both teams. The decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative. I think that you all aren't responding well enough to these claims of every time we use the international system, it tends to get co-opted by the U.S. and the political order. And I think some of your cards kind of even go this way. Your Ricci and Doyle evidence, the end of the cards like global democracies bind themselves into complex global governance to demonstrate restraint and to create other incentives for other states to cooperate in order to reduce the costs of the big states. So the big states try to get engaged in multilateral institutions that look like that they're restricting the big state in order to get more people into that international system in order to make itself better, is the short link argument that I kind of evaluate. I think the Eikenberry evidence says that I-law is just used to integrate the West, and that inclusion is ultimately corrupt. I think their Caldor evidence kind of goes along with that. I don't think there's a great answer to this throughout the debate. You have a piece of evidence that's like small countries want to be able to use the system to be able to challenge the larger countries, which is the 1AR piece of evidence. But it's not like the evidence doesn't say that it would actually be able to do anything about those states in the long term, about those be able to restrict their interest in the long term, since those small states tend to think that it can restrict the big states' interest in the long term, not that it actually ends up doing it. So big states kind of end up corrupting that power. They make the smaller states tend to think that they're going that way. Is kind of how I evaluate a lot of that stuff. As far as the rest of the framework stuff kind of goes, I'm not exactly sure what to do with this. I think that your arguments as to why it moots the affirmative doesn't answer we need these kinds of methods in order to reject racist and sexist language. They have this kind of like yes-no questions, which means that I shouldn't just vote on that. I have to kind of evaluate the link stuff. And then that's kind of the short version. I can answer specific questions after everybody else is done, but that's kind of the gist.
Let's go first.
Well, let me start by saying that even though it was not a huge focal point of the debate, I left kind of at the end of the rounds very, very puzzled about link questions. To me, the plan and the methodology literature it's steeped in is the antithesis of embracing the very nation-state, national-centric norms that you're talking about. The plan forks it over to the ICJ, and almost every card that is read by the negative presupposes, in my opinion, a very different genre of affirmative and a very different genre of methodology to support it. And I can elaborate upon that a little bit more on Quest. I guess I don't think that there's like no link, because I think that like some of their cards in isolation might be sort of steeped in your criticisms of social science, or from a very kind of nationalist perspective. But on balance, without trying to be rude or anything, like just candidly, an awful lot of the evidence that was read to me from the negative is something that the affirmative authors and the advocates that would be behind forking things over the ICJ would read as an add-on. I mean, overwhelmingly in my opinion. So there's a link problem there. Secondly, I thought that there was sort of alt/alternative framework problems that meant that it was hard for me to vote on the ballot that Nick voted on because of just like uniqueness. Like, even if the effort of the affirmative were to get co-opted, I actually thought kind of the one and nar stuff that was read from like Dudziak and kind of at the bottom kind of wound up being some of your kind of best O in the debate. And even that, I just thought the AF was very good at sort of the first order, second order distinction, and how do we kind of get this out of the ivory tower? How does this new mode of scholarship change the world? And if we're only scholars, I don't want any of the 4 students at the end of the round to have a conception of scholarship when they go on and study that is divorced from the pragmatic realities that the affirmative pinpoints. And so I just thought the AF was very strong on those questions, and that presented a kind of a controlling way to view uniqueness, alt, framework, fiat not real kind of issues. And then I guess I thought that movements could solve the case. And I kind of thought about that as a uniqueness argument. And I just sort of, I mean, I don't want to sound like 1987, okay? But like, do they solve for, you know, contingent conflict in Asia that even if international law does not generally work, that we can kind of lessen? And I, you know, thought that that was, you know, ultimately kind of specificity was a friend to the app in that regard. But I mean, and then I thought your drones kind of arts were maybe not developed enough to be O. So to me, or unique. So to me, it started with the link question, but to me, link and alt / everything that the sort of round is supposed to result in terms of scholarship, I just did not think transition to a first order of changing a problematic world, or the entire critique of the nation state just felt like.
I do like those 2 points that you've raised, and I don't know if like Kurt's gonna talk about this, but I guess like, can I go through them in like quick order?
I think that some of the things that I'm going to touch on are how I would resolve those problems to get me to vote for you too, because I saw the debate.
Yeah, no, I figured that's how the debate was going down too. The question was whether we are more cosmopolitan than the AF was, you know, because the AF was also cosmopolitan, you know. But you don't think like our framing arguments like kind of made it a little more difficult for the AF to access there? Like, we're international just as much as the neg is, because we're like, we shouldn't frame problems ever. We should frame every problem.
Why don't view the debate as a referendum on who's more cosmopolitan if the affirmative is not terribly not cosmopolitan? The cosmopolitans wouldn't show up and be like, wow, all Kansas is doing is having the ICJ run roughshod over the United States. I mean, that's a pretty good start.
Well, that's only if they win their mech, though. What if they're tied to their advantages? Doesn't that
their
change
advantages are defenses of the ICJ running roughshod over the United States. I mean, barring narrow things about like how war would break out in Asia, which I thought you got a little bit of like a social science link to. But and so I guess I don't want to say you had no link, okay?
Sure.
But the central nexus link was tough for me to look at Kansas and be like, you know, you need to be a little bit more anti-nation state in order for me to vote for you. I
Well,
mean,
I'm like
Katie
on the
would
same
not
page
like
as
the
you.
plan.
Right. I don't
You know,
disagree with
and-
any of these claims that you're making. I
Right,
guess the
and
more
so-
question is
But
like.
I do think you have some link. I'm not trying to. I get what you're getting at. But then how do you resolve, in my opinion, kind of the alt, which is the second half of what I'm talking about, which is to the extent that the scholarship deployed by Kansas was like, Western, which is kind of how you framed it at times.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, if there's no perm, if the alt solves better, isn't that a reason to vote neg?
like CP add-on style.
Yeah. We're more cosmopolitan. Maybe it resolves more problems than the SQO. Vote neg.
Advantage style though, like
Well-
outweigh CP add-on.
Well, then there's a short-term v long-term impact calculated, I guess, to be had. Maybe.
App equal much more likely to solve problem than neg to solve any problem.
Well, the idea of
then, you
so,
know,
okay, so
you know.
but then you don't think we want a social sciences link? I thought you said we did want a social science, like the way that wars happen.
You want to link to their social science being bad with no way to remedy it that wasn't unique, and your add-on that would emanate from your counter plan made the world more cosmopolitan than the admittedly singular effort of the affirmative. The affirmative could have been better on like. I mean, to me, they questioned the link like old school style, like no link, and not like perm. We are the alt. Like there's like a perm. Do your biz. Like I don't think they committed to a nation state conception of how the ICJ would rule in this instance. But that's on Kansas for not sort of going down that path, I guess. So I get what you're saying, but your O in all instances is struggling mightily from uniqueness issues, especially in a comparative sense. The way in which you make the world more cosmopolitan is not a way, which does very much to fix issues in Asia.
I think you need to go for more of the case defense arguments on that particular advantage.
So like when they say like self-interest defines Asia, could we just be like that's the link when you say like
When they
self-interest?
say link, you say link, they say impact term, right?
Right.
Well then they can't be more cosmopolitan than the K, can they? Or they can't be in the direction of the.
That says that they're more
Or
cosmopolitan.
they're in the direction of the K. They're in the anti-direction of the K. If they're
No, some of the many things that comprise the 1AC might link to your argument. Most don't. Okay.
Well, the plan mechanism doesn't. I agree.
And a lot of the scholarship supports the plan mechanism, right? I mean, there's not a single law review author that's writing for the app that would be like pro-nation state, right? And so I was not worried that I was immersing the debate community and the 20 spectators in this room into a body of literature that was physically nation state centric, right? Yeah.
So I view things pretty similar to Will, but I think there's some different ways that you could resolve my ballot. I think the 2NC and 2NR need to spend a little bit more time just describing the alternative and how your methodology goes about. And that's the thing that I sat here reading your cards over and over again, trying to figure out what the end point of your method is and how that method comes to be. I think that less cards in the 2NC and more time just talking about the alternative would be super helpful for me. Sometimes I think that you could probably sell me on some of the epistemology args that are in the 2NC that don't make it to the 2NR with negation theory spin as a reason why the AF is always fucked. That would be super helpful. And I think that there's also just a framing that you can do that political science literature is kind of going at right now, and that is every time we have a problem with political science, we either try to describe it away with theories that we like, or just ignore it and try to eradicate it. And the alternative is a new way of conceptualizing the problems of the 1AC. They don't have a theoretical backing. You have an interpretation of political science that they don't have one of in the debate. So that's the lens through which we should view future problems. And trying to get me to shift my mind in that direction would be helpful. As for the internal link stuff, I don't understand how the AF causes overshoot or proxy wars. I get how in other instances these things have caused, but without an alternative, it's really hard for me to figure out how, if the AF causes them, they become resolved, or what the uniqueness is, since you're not counterplaying any uniqueness with an alternative in my mind. And then the drone stuff, I read these cards over and over again. I don't know. I don't know how the AF causes an increase.
Well, I'm
probably the least K debater in this room. Maybe Will's got me. But I
That was
actually,
pretty good.
I actually thought the drone dissad kinda had some game for. So I thought there was like a uniqueness I don't know the word I'm thinking. Proponent. Thank you. That they don't end drones. I know that's not a uniqueness drones now, but it's an overriding they don't end drones. And then there's like the Cooper card that says like regulating some things means we're worse in other places, right? And so you don't think that there's just like a linear dissad to aggressively prioritizing drones if you think that we don't end drones, like
Well, alt.
more drones bad. I know that alt doesn't solve drones, but I still feel like there's a linear more drones bad. Like at its basic level. I don't know, and like I get that like I don't feel like the 2AR or the 1AR made like the inverse calls on the argument that said that having to end all drones is what's solving their impacts. It's like there's still an impact to like a linearity of just increasing drones. I think probably the F would increase drones. Obama would be like, all right, armed forces.
So if this is explained, this is much more of an explanation than what I ever got.
That's fair. That's so reasonable.
And so if there's that, and then if there's a 2NR framing argument that says we don't need to win the alternative to win the drones argument. That said, Berzer should probably spend some time analyzing how the alternative, how you're stuck with the alternative, and that there's no judge kick. But you know, that's work that both the 2NR and the 2AR have to do.
I don't understand why you all aren't like, we solved this. Their cards say that this drones violate international law, which means that a complaint would inevitably be filed and ruled against the United States, which means we don't drone strike anymore. Right? That just makes sense to me.
That's why we read those cards. I wanted them to say that, and then boom. But they were like, no, we don't.
Do you feel like your original thread's been sufficiently answered?
I felt like kinda, not really, but you know, I feel like it
uniqueness
was. Yeah, I feel like uniqueness.
Still don't understand. Like, okay, so in the world of like implicit clash, okay, the affirmative has extended an advantage, which says separate from all things all things drone, okay, we may shore up items as it relates to territorial issues in Asia. We have an advantage, okay, and your drone's DA has called into question whether or not the image of the ICJ and subsequently the United States can be sufficiently reversed by that, okay, and I did not grant zero solvency to the advantage. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
On the basis of your drone's defensive argument. And once that happens, it's tough for your drone's offensive argument, in light of the uniqueness issues that we've kind of agreed upon, to just be bigger.
Yeah, what if we were just like, that means that it causes territorial boom, and then just kind of like a turns case
I didn't
inevitable.
think that you...
We didn't say that.
Hypothetically, then it's, you know, if things are different, they'd be different, but to me, there's no dot connected between drones and Asia, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And if you were just in a pure policy world, which is kind of the contingency that we're talking about, because now this is getting explained as a little bit more of a plan B divorced from everything else, you know what I mean?
I agree.
Whereas
I'm a
kind
bad
of the 2NR
caterer.
only went to the K and was sort of like, we got this drones thing, and there wasn't a lot of like negates the plan, lose within the policy framework biz going on there. So it would be fair, reasonable in my opinion, for everyone on the panel to kind of conceptualize it in a variety of ways, but you wouldn't want to walk into like a hardcore policy debate and just be like, drones DA no AF, drop an advantage. I mean, that's not like, you know, situating yourself in the best spot, you know, so.
I can envision a 2NR that does that, because you still have this the China stuff that's conceded on the other advantage, which is like, this solves Asian conflict. China soft power, which is conceded, is inevitable. They moderate conflicts in Asia. The only risk of that would be this drones dissad. I can envision that being a 2NR.
Okay. The second question I had was to Will. So like, I get that like the AF doesn't link to the K. So like, I'm on the same page. But I thought this.
I gave Richard went back and forth on the link.
Yeah,
You got some.
But I thought
you got some snapshot cards in the 1EC that are in a Western motive scholarship.
I think the Smith card in the 1NR is interesting, and I think it turns the Murphy card. Why, if this is the problem?
You're dropping off the titles. Let me even help a little.
Sorry. Well, the Smith was the one in our international law gets co-opted by the United States to enforce nationalistic interests. Yeah, and so I feel like one, I'm hard pressed how the AF solves that link in the 2AR, but two is that I think that like that turns
their ICJ like reason, like it seems like that's problematic. Like, how did you evaluate that link? Is only my question.
Yeah, no, like I said, and I kind of referenced this a little bit thinly. I did think that where you got the most of your O was kind of the stuff that happened in the bottom of the 1 and R. Well, number one, uniqueness.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Like where I differ from Nick, without I think there's reasonable room for disagreement. I don't want to come across otherwise, but where I differ from Nick is that he has explained in oral critique that, in my opinion, does not remedy the fact that international law is largely inevitable and that the flaws in the nation-state system are not fixed by what the negative is put on the table.
Well, the uniqueness thing, U.S. not part of ICJ now. Their Murphy card from 2005 says developing nations are taking advantage of ICJ and it's working for them. So uniqueness, U.S. not in ICJ now. Is it?
But your partner's entire argument is that the entire conception of what the ICJ right now is state-centric, which is where all of your offense comes from, in an attempt to move away from that. And I would say it fails.
Yeah, I get ICJ is the link too, but
so I'm worried that we're not connecting here.
Yeah.
Uniqueness still
I'm just
co-optation turn. What is going to happen in the status quo that's not going to be a train wreck in Asia?
You will. No,
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah. What's gonna happen
If everything is framed through like Asia, like short term outweighs, like we obviously lose. Like I agree with that. And
but it's not even just short term. I don't care when Asia.
I understand. No, I understand. I think
I don't care when Asia turns into hell on wheels. There's not a remedy for the negative that cease it from doing so.
No, I understand.
And then I do think that they read a card in the 1AR which suggested like BT dubs, at least enough to kind of deny what would be like your like prior die co-optation always no matter what cease. Like they suggested that there is evidence which suggests that liberal international order has on occasion succeeded. I thought that answered your kind of cause effect cause stuff that we really haven't talked about very much, at least decently. And then like specificity, which is kind of what I tried to get at a little bit. Like hard pressed for me to tell Asia, hey Asia, definitely AF going to take a shot that might work to save unquestionable problem in Asia, but might get co-opted over the long term. Given that the system's already co-opted now, it just felt like why not relent to the ICJ and take a shot? Does that answer it? Or am I missing your point still?
Why is the ICJ co-opted now? If the United States is
state-centric.
Okay, boom. We just okay.
All right,
All right, thank you.
Joel?
Nation states.
Yes,
Right.
yeah. Now I understand.
Yeah.
All right. Great.
What's that? Well, this was a great debate. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you very much.
I was just told myself on YouTube right now.
Yeah,
We've
my
all
mom's
been,
watching
we've
you
been on
right
the
now.
camera.
She's
We've
texting
been all
me
hanging.
about your FD.
Sorry, Mrs. Quinn.
Mrs.
Still love
Douglas.
your son.
But
right?
This was
Terry
afraid of.
Douglas
I was
is
going
real
to say
pissed
cuss
right
words,
now.
and I said cuss words, and now they're on the internet.
oh, my mom's sending me cuss words. No, I'm kidding.
Real angry Terry Douglas.
A very angry Terry, but Terry Douglas is always angry.
I think I can do this. I'm gonna lose
Oh
it.
no,
Guarantee
Dwight.
I'm gonna lose it.
No.
God damn it, Terry. Negation theory.
I mean, that's not something I'm always sold on, but I just thought that's